Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The Tuesday, August 11th briefing meeting will now begin. Ms. La Riviera will not be joining us today because she is not well. We wish her a fast recovery, and we will carry on without her. Board members, we're going to start off. If you look at the revised agenda, we added in front of Mr. Sarah. He so kindly is going to wait for us. We can finish up what we did in our workshop yesterday, which is the superintendent goals. Everybody should have received a handout by Dr. Graham clarifying the third one. We had 3 done. We're still have 2 outstanding. The third one was was changed. Dr. Graham, if you'd like to go over the changes on number 3, explain your rationale that we can get that one.
Sure. After we talked yesterday, I asked that staff call DOE because we were basing that reporting, what we were going to measure by, that we would be getting a standards by standards report from the state once they send us all our scores. They can give us no assurance that that's what they're going to do. They believe what they will probably do, according to what they told Dr. Itzen, is that they will be sending us subgroup reports rather than standard by standard. So rather than make a goal that won't be able to be achieved because we won't have the correct data, we reworked it, and the focus will be on elementary, and I'll give you the rationale for that. But essentially, maintain or increase 70% of the students in grades 3 through 5 will maintain or increase their reading based on the measuring by the STAR. And we want to use the STAR. It's nationally norm referenced. It is something that we have control over, and by that I mean we give it. We can give it when we believe we need to give it, so there's no waiting for anybody for the results. And we have found already, and I put this in the note I sent to you, that there is evidence that the STAR results are highly predictive of success on the FSA, and we're basing that on that 85% match between the 2015 STAR and those that landed in the bottom quintile that the state did already send us, and in 3rd grade, and it is clear that how they did on the STAR was closely aligned with how they performed on the FSA, so we think it's a good measure. It will focus just on grades 3 through 5, so the question may be, well, what about middle school and high school? Obviously, we're still going to look for improvement there. The reason I'm keeping it out of the goals, we don't have a similar common assessment for all of middle school, all of middle school and all of high school. We will get data from the state, but it won't be by June 1st. And Dr. Itzen has said that the earliest we can expect anything from the state next summer by statute would be June 8th is when they're required to, and then we go from there. So I'm trying to fall within the parameters we need for these goals. We believe this is a stretch. The highest learning gain that's ever occurred in 1 year with this group is 67%, so we're saying 70%. Also, I will tell you that maintaining means that they have made a year's worth of gains. And so maintaining isn't that they haven't accomplished anything, but they've made a year's worth of gains. So that's the rationale behind staff, and I appreciate they spent this morning working on this. And last night it occurred to me, we're basing this on that the state's going to give us data standard by standard, and so when we confirmed this morning, we were unable to confirm that that's really going to happen.
Board members, any comments? Ms. Morgan?
Yeah, I don't understand. Do we have 2 goals here then? One is to maintain a growth, and then the other is to...
Now, what we're saying is 70% of the students, grades 3 through 5, will either maintain or increase their reading score as measured by the STAR.
Well, how is maintain a stretch?
Yeah. Maintain means that they've made a year's worth of learning gains.
Why
we don't want
to
to we don't want to lose anybody.
Yeah, but why is that a stretch?
Well, I would tell you that maintaining is as challenging as is gaining. So, and if you don't want maintain in there, you just want those that are increased. We want 70% of all students grades 3 through 5 to be at the level, a higher level.
Yeah, that's why I'm reading this as you're telling it to me as 2 different goals.
Well, it's one goal with two portions to it. The students that are already there, we want them to not drop, and the students that aren't there, we want them to increase.
So then it should be maintain and increase.
What does it say?
Or. Yeah, because some
I'm-
students
then
will maintain some.
I'm looking
or
at
some will
staff.
increase.
Jean Ann?
She needs to come to the mic.
If a student's maintained, they have accomplished a year's growth.
Right. And that's the minimum that we would expect. I would expect.
Okay? So what do you want it to say?
Well, that's just me, so I'll
Right.
back off and let the others
Fisher?
jump in.
Well, I understand what you're saying, because when you have kids who are at level 3, 4, or 5, some of those will increase. The ones who are already at the top will maintain. Right? Okay, because there's no way of measuring their exceeds. And then our lower quartile, the 1s and 2s, we are expecting for them to make gains, to move up. They may be within their levels, but they will still make a gain as measured by that
Okay.
particular instrument.
Okay, I get it. I think, so, it may need to be
Everybody,
clarified.
there'll be movement with everybody.
Okay, got it.
Ms. Dozier?
All right,
Thank you.
what is the scoring for STAR? We're talking about maintaining, and we talk about those students that are making 4 or 5, we want them to maintain that score. But that's, I think, isn't that FCAT scoring?
Right, and the STAR is good at predicting success or not on the FSA. It's
Okay, but
So
what I'm
the-
saying is,
It's reliable.
One
when
of you
it
needs to
comes-
come
so
up and
the
explain the STAR,
ranking is
please.
equal, is what you're saying.
I'm sorry.
What you're saying is, you've got an equal ranking with the STAR and with FSA.
Well, here comes
Well,
Dr.
what we're
Itzen, and
saying
he'll-
is that what we're finding
Andy.
is the levels on the STAR do predict where a child will land on FSA.
I get that.
Dr. Itzen, you want to explain the STAR a little bit?
You're not on.
It'll come on.
Okay, if I might, STAR results come in various different scores. I think the score we're referring to here is a percentile rank. So the way a percentile rank works is if you maintain your percentile rank over time, then you are progressing. So for example, if you're at the 50th percentile in the fall, and you still end up at the 50th percentile in the spring, then you have made a year's growth while maintaining your percentile rank.
Okay, and if I can continue.
Please.
That was what I kind of thought. So if we've got a student that's at the 50th percentile, I can't agree with that, because that in itself is saying that that's okay for that student to be at 50%. We've got to increase student performance, and that's not increasing student performance if we're maintaining those students at 50%.
Well, no,
And if I were a parent and that were okay, I'd be a pretty lousy parent.
yeah, we're not talking about a percent, we're talking about a percentile rank. So there is a scale score that increases over time, but in order to maintain your percentile rank, you have to increase your scale score.
That's not what you're-
That's
So-
not what it says here, though.
So
He's saying is inherent that's what he's saying, inherent in the percentile gradient is that inherent continuation, that if you perform 1 year of education, 1 year of time, you will stay where you are. In other words, you've achieved your metric that the state thinks you're needed to achieve to stay that. Now that means your raw score will increase,
correct.
whatever that delta is, to make that year of actual gains. But everybody's moving. Everybody's supposed to be moving, because everybody's moving up that learning gain mark. Is that correct, no, Mike?
Correct.
And so, Dr. Itzen, what you're saying is, I'm an old bell curve person, so I know that we all fall under there somewhere. And if we're at the 50th percentile, we are at the average. We fall where most of the people in the world fall.
Yes, that's right.
If we're above the 50th percentile, we're above average.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, that helps,
that-
thank you.
I think that's okay with me as a parent.
And again, in 1 year, we've never gotten more than 67% to be able to do this, and that's why the 70% is a stretch.
Ms. Dozier, any more questions or comments?
No, I, I'm not a rocket scientist, and I understand what you're saying, that 50% is the average, and above that is above the average. I'm sitting here and I'm looking at this, and I'm trying to think, is this a goal that, how are we going to communicate this to our public? How are we going to because if I had a problem with it, Miss Morgan had a problem with it, and we didn't quite understand it, then how are we going to communicate this out there to our parents? Because I read the news press today, and some of the stuff that was in the news press wasn't accurate as far as what we did yesterday, which that's not unusual, because a lot of times, you know, things get lost in the interpretation. But these goals are very critical, and I think that they have to be, it has to be to where they have to be, you know, as I said yesterday, they have to be, we don't want to do goals that are not achievable. We want achievable goals. But we also have to be able to explain to people, and I don't want to go out and have to explain for 30 minutes about one goal. I want to be able to just say, okay, this means that, you know, number one, we are going to we're going to reduce the dropout rate by 1%. What does that mean? You will see if our dropout rate right now is 1.7, you're going to see a percentage drop in that dropout rate.
Well, I think the simple statement you would make about this one is that 70% of our 3rd through 5th graders will be making gains in reading. You could honestly say that were we to meet this goal.
Okay, I get it.
Okay. All right.
We've been using the gains language for a couple of years now, so, and again, if anybody needed further explanation, I understand you want to keep it as simple as possible, but that would be the simple statement. 70% grades 3 through 5 will make gains in reading,
Which is the higher than what we've done.
higher than we've ever done in a year.
Okay.
Does that help? Okay.
We have consensus there, board members?
Yes.
I think it's a good stretch goal, and I think it's a good one for our academic readiness. Number 4, we didn't really agree to this one. The recommended capital plan is approved by the board. We kind of ran out of time before we could fully articulate that, and I understand Dr. Graham's frustration that at the end of the day, it's subjective of whether or not we have our thumbs up or thumbs down in a vote for the 5 of us. However, it is something that it's kind of a one or, you know, binary solution. It's either is or it isn't. I would like to change it a little bit to have it the recommended the capital plan that generates at least 27, you know, so again, we quantify it. Recommend a capital plan that generates at least $27 million a year for the next 5 years, that is board approved, that includes timeline with milestones, resources required, and obstacles and plans on how each obstacle that is listed will be overcome. In other words, so we see quantifiable. So in other words, it's kind of a metric within a metric. When we get this, when she presents it to us, it's a viable plan. It actually gives us the road plan, whatever we have a capital problem. And I appreciate when Ms. Morgan brought this up. She's like, look, we keep talking about it and keep saying it, but at the end of the day, we need a plan, and Dr. Graham's, I think, hesitant to give us a plan because she doesn't really, I don't know.
Well,
But this actually gives us, this is telling her exactly what we want.
Can you say that one more time?
All right, I'll say it again. Recommend a capital plan that generates at least $27 million a year for the next 5 years.
A capital plan that does what? That
Generates at least $27 million annually for the next 5 years. Because that is what we had talked about, is the capital need annually for the next every year for the next 5 years.
May I insert something while you all are thinking about that? I got over it. Yes, I'm a processor. So after we talked yesterday, it is important that we got to come up with a viable plan, and we're working on it as staff consistently. So some staff met this morning and worked through, and we will present what we believe is feasible and possible and doable. And if you want to add these parameters, that's fine too. And then whether you approve it or not is entirely up to you. But we've got to have a plan, And it would be great if it was a plan that the board was confident in and comfortable with. And my reaction yesterday was, we were working on that and then it didn't work. So, but even before I got here this morning, staff was already in the room going, listen, we can do this, and this is what we're already working on. So we're confident that we can bring a plan forward. And worst case scenario, you don't like it, this is helpful because it's got some specific parameters. And I forgot to tell you, when I sent this, the asterisks were the ones that were already discussed and agreed on. The other two were us coming back this morning and doing some work to bring them back.
Ms. Morgan?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether this is consistent with my intent, because this 27 million, I think, is intended to drive us towards your solution, which is to take money out of operating and put it into capital. My recommendation was that we come up with a new revenue source that was supported by the public. And so I'm not sure.
But that doesn't say it in your recommendation.
It said publicly.
No, I've got it right here. Superintendent obtains board approval for a community-based initiative
That's what I
to-
meant. That's what I said in the meeting yesterday, that I meant by community based, we would get community approval for something.
Okay, and when we had that discussion, we said this isn't measurable. So in saying that, how will you tell us that we can measure that?
We pass or we don't pass.
Right.
That's the metric.
But the 27 million is not a number I made up. That was a number that the district, at our presentation, the needs from Dr. Desmores is, we need 27 million every year for the next 5 years, or we don't get out of a capital plan, out of our hole. So that's, if a capital plan, we only generate 12 million, we still have a capital crisis. That was the reason, Ms.
Okay, we
Ms.
might
Dozier.
need to get Ms. Desimore up here, because, all right, if she said we need 27 million over the next 5
No,
years.
every year for the next 5 years.
Every year. All right, recommend a capital plan that generates 27 million over the course of the next 5 years. But
20
you're
million
saying
per year.
27 million every year.
Yes.
Okay, every year. Over.
Do you want to have Dr.
over-
Desmores up here, Ms.
over
Morgan?
the- Yeah. I'm just saying we might. I wasn't giving her an instruction.
To her, she got her
So,
instruction.
my question to you still is, we need to find out exactly what will that 27 million do for us? Will that take care of our building needs? Will it also take care of our, no, I'm looking at Steve, I'm sorry.
Look at Dr. Desmores.
And I
Who
think,
came up with the 27?
No, I
So I'm-
didn't. That's the
well,
point. I
okay,
didn't. She
okay,
did.
okay.
I'm just repeating
Well,
it.
you repeated it and I'm talking to
Yeah.
you, okay? So with that 27 million, where does it put us? Does it put us in the growth of building that we need? Is that, does it also take care of any debt reduction? What all will that 27 million per year do for us?
No debt reduction, but again, I feel it more appropriate. I could tell you, but I feel that's not my place. I believe it really should go to a higher pay grade. Dr. Desmores, would you please explain?
I'm going to ask, and then she will explain. As you look at this goal, if you could be careful about writing the plan, just if you want us to create what we believe is a capital plan that will address our capital needs for the next 5 years, that's different than you telling us what it's going to address. So just throwing that out there for you all decide. It's my goal too, though. But Amy, if you want to explain the need in numbers for them, because that's what they're talking about, and then if you all can decide, do you want a plan that addresses the capital needs for the next 5 years that you can live with and approve, then it will be upon me. The goal will be that I provide that plan to you. That make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we've talked several things in the past. So the 27 million that Mr. Toiber is referring to does not take into account any debt reduction. We had not really, we had discussed that some, but in the information that we had, the 27 million was not, debt reduction was not included in that. So what that 27 million really means is that we would have additional dollars and enough money to take care of the maintenance needs that, have been put on the side for the past several years because of the crunch in capital. So all of the things that we had discussed previously that you can think of as rotation, the painting, the carpets, the roofing, items like that, those would be taken care of through that. In addition to that, we also had some technology needs that we talked about having a funding shortfall for. That would be included in that. And we also had some building, some additional seat capacity in that number as well. However, if we do that, that 27 million doesn't necessarily fund us on a cash basis for all the schools that we're going to need for over the next 5 to 10 years, but it will be able to get us to a point where we'll be able to cover some additional dollars for those buildings, and then be able to handle some additional debt service for those as well. So did that answer the question?
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
And again, so to Ms. Morgan's point, I'm okay with not putting the number in, just that we need a capital plan, but I do feel it's important that we have a timeline and that we have milestones and that we know the resources required to make this plan occur. And we also know the obstacles that the plan will encounter, and how are they planning to eliminate those obstacles.
Okay. But the statement is simply recommend a capital plan that is approved by the board. Everything else is embedded in your expectation when you deal with the superintendent, when we deal with the superintendent about what the plan will look like, as opposed to putting it in the
Right.
goal itself.
And if you want to say 5 year, if you want to put a,
5 years, yeah.
if you want to put how long a plan, how far out you want us to go and want to include that in the goal, that might,
5-year capital plan.
is 5 year what you're thinking, Mr. Toiber? Or, yeah, because I think that's kind of how we work. 5, 10.
Yeah, every plan has to be at least 5 years, but we have to submit some additional information to the state over 10 and 20.
Ms. Dozier?
Okay, I just heard Dr. Desamore say every plan has to be 5 years. You're talking about now the plan that goes to the state.
Yes, yes.
Not talking about, because we're talking about a community-based initiative, but it may not be 5 years.
That's right.
It may only be 3 years.
Yes, yes.
Are you requiring in this goal that it be a community initiative, or are you requiring that we bring a capital plan and it may be community initiative and not community? It could
Right.
be both.
Right.
So
Partially.
I would want that to be clear in the goal. Is it
Well-
enough to say recommend a 5-year plan to address the capital needs of the district? Or do you want in there that it has to include, if you want me to recommend the plan, I would like the opportunity to develop the plan with staff. So, and that, having said that, obviously, I'll be talking to each of you, what is it you're exactly thinking ought to be in there? I mean, I'm going to obviously get your input, because I want you to agree with it at the end of the day, so.
Workshop.
So do you want to put in there, recommend a 5-year plan to address the district's capital needs? Would that work for everybody?
That work for everybody?
Well, I do like community-based, and I'll tell you why. Because I've had several people have asked me, why don't y'all just do a survey? And that's something that we never did. We never did a survey. So, we survey everything else, so why not survey the community to find out, because I want some measurement. And the measurement that I was getting before was that y'all will never pass a capital plan the rate you're going, because there were several factors that I was hearing about. So pushing those factors aside, if we're going to go out, and I said this, I don't want to go out for a capital plan unless I know it's going to pass. And the only way that you're going to know that it's going to pass is if you survey the public, survey the community.
Okay, so I hear that, and I know that you want that, and so in my head, I'm thinking, okay, if there's not a community-based piece to this, the plan I bring forward isn't going to be approved by all the board members. So I guess I'm asking that you keep the goal generic enough that we have the freedom to do those things, but I'm very clear, you want to know that the community's had some input in whatever plan we bring forward.
No. That's not what
Or do you, or you,
all right, there's a difference in input and surveying.
well, no, and we can do the input by surveying. I mean,
You know,
Can
you
we
can,
do this
you
in a
can.
workshop?
have a conversation about this
No,
goal.
we can't.
Okay.
Because in order for us to vote on them tonight, we've got to clarify now what we want in these goals. Because I can tell you, the way it's written right now, I can't support it.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
I hear you. I just hoping Ms. Fisher would have some.
okay.
I just want to clarify with Dr. Desamore. If a capital plan, a 5-year capital plan is presented to the board, it could include a number of factors or strategies, one of which could be a community-based effort such as sales tax initiative or referendum. Am I understanding that correctly? That
Yes,
could be
that's-
part of the total plan.
Yes, it could be, or
other-
could not be, depending on
Right.
what happens in the future. Yeah,
Okay. And other parts could be things like eliminate waste.
correct.
Okay.
Or other parts could be things like adjusting what our long-term outlook is on what maintenance will look like at our schools, and presenting what really that new look will be, and what types of things will get done or not get done. There's a lot of things that could happen inside of the plan that we could bring back, depending on what parameters the superintendent would like to see, the types of input that we get from you all, and whatever direction the goal takes us.
Right, so the terminology saying the 5-year capital plan is like the umbrella, and within that or under that are different strategies and pieces.
Right,
Okay.
correct. So I'm envisioning a process, whereas we are having discussions and working through the parts and that will be in that capital plan, what it will entail, exactly what it will encompass, and coming to agreement on what that is for that 5-year plan.
Right, so then once we come to consensus that that is a goal, then the work would begin as far as putting the plan together.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Dozier, I don't quite think that has you over. Can we talk a little more about what you're looking for? Are you looking for a necessary component of community involvement or community input, or what do you need?
I think it's necessary to have that community component.
In what form are you
Well,
talking?
in the form of knowing that the community, especially if we're going to go to them, now if we're talking about eliminating waste and we're talking about things like this, if we're talking about going to the public and asking them for money, there's got to be a community plan. You know, other things like eliminating waste and readjusting our maintenance, the way we do maintenance now, to try to reduce cost, any of those things, that's in-house. You know, we have the authority, we have the power to do that, and we can do it, and we vote on it, and we don't have to ask for the community's support on that, because we are making adjustments in the budget the way we have it. But if we are trying to increase our budget by going to the public, and I see this going that way, because $27 million is a big ticket. And we are going to, I see basically the biggest part of the plan is going to be that we're going to do a tax initiative. And when you look at other communities that have gotten a tax initiative, the biggest part was that community input where they said up front, you know, they put their name on the dotted line, they're willing to support it. So that's where I am with this, because we need to be sure that before we put it out there, if that's where staff wants to go, that it's going to pass.
Before we
Can
get started, Ms. Fisher,
Thank you. Could we then say, recommend a 5-year capital plan to include a community-based initiative to replenish, no, not even, leave that out, to include a community-based initiative that is approved by the board? So then we're saying ahead of time that we are expecting that community-based initiative, which is probably the sales tax referendum, to be included in our next five-year capital plan. Could we say it that way? And then that's covered?
I think what Ms. Dozier's looking for is not, even when we talk about initiative, it's hard to really say what that is. I think what Ms. Dozier's looking for is some type of a pre-approval. In other words, to get enough key components in our community, you know, the realtors, the unions, the teachers, all the different groups to say, we're with you.
We're on board.
We're on board.
Right.
That type of pre-approval before we go out and spend the money and do the, you know, or what is it going to take to get, you know, or a mechanism in place to show that we have those type of groups supporting us.
So then, if I'm interpreting that correctly, what we need is for the superintendent and staff to present to us a plan that will include all of those strategies, and we either approve it or we don't. And then, once we have the plan and we approve it, we can present it to the community and ask them what they think, whether it be by survey or town hall meetings or whatever. I see what you're saying, but we need a plan. We need a plan regardless, right, Dr. Desamore? We need a five-year capital plan, and even more extensive than that for the state purposes.
Yes.
Okay.
Ms. Morgan?
Yeah, well, following up on what Ms. Fisher said, I'm not sure I would put the community piece after the plan. I think to the extent that you're workshopping this or you're doing whatever staff is doing, and you know that some piece of this is going to be a community plan, you've got to go out and do that survey that Mrs. Dozier's talking about before you present the plan to the board. Not after, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, but I don't think we need to write that into this. I think that needs to be an understanding if we have a workshop and we just make it clear to staff and the superintendent that that's what we want.
Well, I don't think we need a workshop on it. We just need to, right now, say that that is
Expectation.
the expectation that we have.
Okay, but we don't need to put it in the, do we have to put it in the goal?
Not for me.
Well, I would ask Mr. Martin that.
Mr. Martin?
Well, if it's something you want to measure, if you want to make the decision on the accomplishment of the goal based upon that criteria, then it's clearest
You're
if it's
saying
in
is
the
that
language,
we need to
yes.
have it in there.
Yeah, I think that's right. Okay.
So in other words,
Could you write it for us, Mr. Martin?
and you want to write it as, Ms. Dozier, how about this? Mr. Martin, could you write it, are you talking about a condition precedent to proposing the plan? In other words, recommending it to us after it has went through some level of public scrutiny and approval. So as a condition precedent, is that what you're talking about? Before it's brought to us, she has went out to the public and got the requisite buy-in. Can you write that in a condition precedent, Mr. Martin?
I can try.
Okay. Board, does that work?
Yes. One more.
One more. All right, one more. The last one is.
I'm sorry. I just have a clarifying question related to that. So typically, in a typical cycle, you all would not approve a capital plan until September. So now are we talking about an additional step in which we would bring a plan to you before June or sometime when you all have to do this? So this would be a different timing than what we would typically do with our capital plan. I just want to make sure I understood that correctly. Okay.
Yes.
And I want to understand that it is the superintendent's recommendation and that the board is going to wait until that recommendation comes. I mean, talk to me all you want about it, but before you publicly weigh in one way or the other?
Yes.
Okay.
And I have a question now of Mr. Martin. Mr. Martin, we've got one more to go, and I know you wanted to have time to do this. And looking at the agenda here, it looks like we are pretty close to the board meeting tonight. Have you arranged maybe for somebody else to sit in for you as?
Mr.
Okay,
Dodig is
all right.
available.
Okay, thank
If
you.
I could ask one more question before I try to write this. As Dr. Desamore has discussed, I mean, there is a regular cycle for the school board to adopt a capital plan, and I was trying to find the statute. Dr. Desamore's may be able to help me. I believe there is a legal requirement that a capital plan be adopted, that it be in place. So That causes me a bit of hesitation in calling this a capital plan and making its achievement contingent upon approval, because the board has to approve a capital plan.
They might just not approve mine.
Capital revenue
you're,
initiative or
Amy, what I'm hearing you say is
In
that
here.
the required one goes later, correct?
Yes,
June
correct.
1st?
Keith, I missed the last part of what you said, but I think what we're talking about here is two different, it really is two different levels of approval or two different types of documents or plans that we're talking about. I think the format of what you all are going to want to approve in June is going to be something that is more detailed and more, more process and procedure oriented for the district in terms of the types of things that are in the plan and the ramifications of those things that are in the plan, all the things that you listed, Mr. Toiber. So this is something different than what you would typically approve in September, which is really a DOE document, the work plan, right? So it really is going to be two separate and distinct things, but we will be doing something related to that twice now.
Ms. Morgan?
Can we call it capital revenue initiative?
Well, that would be fine, but it sounds like it is more than that, because it's not just about revenue, it's also about
Capital initiative.
potentially eliminating expenditures and such, but
And I'm going to ask,
Dr. Desmores understands the distinction, so I'm fine.
you can write it.
But I think Ms. Morgan's point is that if we call it something different, because what Dr. Morris is saying, the capital plan is actually how we're going to allocate, what's our 5-year capital allocation plan that's required by the DOE, and rather than get the semantics of having these two confused, if you give it some innovative title that accomplishes this goal that we're trying to do a capital source mechanism or source plan, rather than the capital allocation plan that we're required by statute. Is that Ms. Morgan's your point? Okay. Any more questions, Mr. Martin?
No, sir.
All right, one more. Dr. Graham worked a little bit on this to try to figure out what we had talked about when I said about breaking up a little bit, looking behind the curtain a little bit. And Dr. Graham, would you like to explain what you did?
Yes, after you talked yesterday, we talked today, Dr. Desamore and I, about could we actually figure out a way to look at how we're allocating, which we're always looking at it anyway. And she pointed out that in the strategic plan, we've got in there that we want to look and be sure that we are effectively allocating our resources so that they align with district priorities. So the goal I'm suggesting is that this year would be a study, and we actually study our resource allocation. We look at financial and demographic data, we look at achievement, we look at all those things and do some comparisons and identify what might be improved as far as how we allocate, which is I think where you were headed, based on what we find. Remember yesterday we talked about is there a correlation? So this would be the year that we would study, is there a way to do that, and could it be done better than it's being done? Make some comparisons, and then we would have, then we'd be able to make a plan moving forward with allocations. So this year, there might not be any change next spring about how we allocate, but it would give us the information we need if we do need to look at it, that we will. And it might be that we would finish it in time to do that. So it's to address what you suggested. It also supports what we say we're going to do in the strategic plan. And so, and we believe it would be work worthy of the time. And having it as a performance goal would get it to the top of the priority list.
Board members, if I could just weigh in, I know it doesn't seem like a metric as far as for a performance, but we're doing a kind of really a paradigm shift with a strategic plan, how we're budgeting, and so it's more of a heavy work, carrying some heavy water, but it really gives us the basis to be able to do some meaningful goals once we see the data, because we really can't ask for changes to occur because no one really knows. This is really kind of the first time that the district and the board's really looking at it this way. So I support it just because I think that we have to start somewhere, and I think this is a meaningful way to do so.
And there was a goal last year, just came to my mind, where the whole goal was get the committee established and have some baseline data at the end of the year, and that was the superintendent's workforce advisory. And so if there's a sense that, well, if you just develop a study, what's that going to do? Well, it's going to give us a whole lot of data that then we can start, if you want to continue down that path, create some measurable goals. So the measure is that the study is completed and we have made those comparisons, and we can look at what that would mean to how we allocate resources to schools.
Ms. Morgan?
Okay.
Ms. Dozier?
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't say I'm not real comfortable with this. And I'll tell you why. Because we are talking about studying something and then putting it in place. And I'm wondering how our teachers are going to react to that. You know, they say we study stuff all year long. We don't get a bonus for it. So, and I realized that we had one last year. I think that, you know, this is not a goal that I can't see it bringing us any type of immediate improvement. All right, I'm going to move down to training and quality. There are 3 different recommendations here. Ms. Fisher, improve the use of quality principles in policy and process for each department. And then there's 100% of schools will train their entire staff in quality by the end of the 2015-16 school year. And then I'm not real sure how the first one is in, as far as quality. I think that's more of a specific target for a group of students instead of quality. When I read that, I didn't see how that really came under quality, but you didn't put it under quality, somebody else did, so.
And I don't know if I have that with me.
It's on page 5, under training and quality. It's the one that you had put together. Do you have that?
I'll have to pull it up. I didn't pull those up.
And I'm just pitching something for quality, because we've gone down the road of quality. And, you know, we sat the other day and we listened to several hours about quality. And I've been on this horse for a long time, and I'm getting saddle sores. If you don't put your resources behind quality, you're never going to have a quality organization. There's a reason that, and I'm just going to use Lee Memorial Health Systems. There's a reason that they rank very highly with quality and they perform the way they do. It's because they put money in it. And, you know, just little things that they put in place. You know, and as I said to you yesterday, a lot of our teachers and a lot of our staff, they've heard the word, and they think it's a buzzword, and we're talking about quality's been in this district now for about 14 years, and yet they feel as though they've never had any training in it. And those are the people that, where the rubber hits the road, those are the people that we need to give the training to. Now, in some of your schools, and I'm thinking of 2 particular schools that have just, you know, busted the world open with their, you know, quality initiatives. Tropic Isles has just gone, you know, gangbusters. I wish every school in all of our schools would do that. And yet, you know, those students are trained in quality. They know the quality tools. They use the quality tools on a daily basis. And then they go up to a middle school. They go to a school where maybe there's really not initiatives of quality being used. And so all of that training that they received just kind of, it's not, you know. And, you know, they say you use it or you lose it. And we have never taken on training this, and I'm talking about teachers, I'm talking about custodians, I'm talking about everyone should be trained in quality. And I'm going to go back to the little guy that's up on top of the launch pad and he's sweeping, and Tom Jones comes up to him and says, "What are you doing, sir?" He says, "I'm preparing to send a man to the moon." He knew what his job was. He knew that his job was to make sure that quality existed, because if you didn't have quality, that rocket would never take off. If there were things on the ground that impounded that rocket from being able to soar up in the air, and that's the way everything should be in our school. When you walk down a hall and you see a custodian picking up a piece of paper, what are you doing? I'm making sure that this is an environment that students can succeed, and that, you know, that should be your answer. And we're not getting that. And the only way to get it is to provide training for,
you know, and I'm not saying that a lot of these people don't already have some of the quality initiatives themselves, but we've got to be able to say that the training has been out there.
Ms. Morgan, then Dr. Graham.
Yeah, I guess my concern is that we're talking about quality training, but what's going on in the district is something called the lean process. And the lean process is what's used at Lee Memorial. And that's a process that works essentially in operating departments as well as in schools, because it's really about, remember they talked yesterday about the GEMA? You go to the source. And so I guess my concern is that when you say quality, what do we mean by quality? Because I've been watching what staff is trying to do with lean, which is, I guess, a variation on quality or
It's just a discipline within.
okay, it's a discipline. So, you know, I'm not even sure we're all on the same page what quality means in this district and what the initiatives are and what we mean by training in it. So I just want to put that out there. And I appreciate what you're saying, but I think,
Well, and again, to make things easier, and Dr. Graham, I'll go to you as well, but quality is the overriding compass, is the overriding theology of improvement, and whether it be waste reduction, you call it lean, you call it Six Sigma or Kaizen, it's all disciplines within that quality initiative. So lean, you know, the fact that the lean operations is actually making efficient processes efficient and looking at the best way to do things, and that's just, I mean, that is now the quality discipline that's actually evolved. Dr. Graham?
I just wanted to say, one, the tenets of lean and continuous improvement and quality are run throughout the strategic plan, so those are going to be addressed. And I heard what Ms. Dozier said yesterday and today about training and how that filters down. Part of what we were trying to do, at least from my perspective with the goals this year, was to cover all areas of the organization. And so I was excited, actually, about the resource allocation, because I think ultimately that's gonna, that has the potential to really hit how we're taking care of our schools as far as their specific needs, and maybe the budgeting will look different if we find the correlations that we think we may find. So that's why I was encouraging that. Quality training of every staff member, we can measure it that everyone got the training. That doesn't really guarantee that it's happening. And what we're trying to do through our objectives in the strategic plan is that the quality tools will be used and become inbred in how we work. So quality is a way of work, and it is. You know, I want to work with goals that you all are comfortable with as well. But since they're my goals as well, I just wanted to put out there, I'm trying to spread out where we focus our energies to impact as much of the whole as we can in the entire organization, all facets of it.
Ms. Fisher?
I'm good.
So right now we've got two on the table. One has to do with the allocations. The other one, and I have to agree with Ms. Dozier, it doesn't give us a metric. Perhaps if we delayed it, let that work get studied, and we bring it back when it's actually we have data to make something measurable on it, then we do have to go move something more forward. Does anybody have anything else besides the quality? And quality is important. So I mean, that is to have every school to have everybody have a class in quality, whether it be the Kaizen, the Lean, the Six Sigma. I know.
And I will say, with the NEAF schools, we now have 30, and they've all received extensive training in quality.
Ms. Fisher?
So then that's a work in progress with the NEA grant, because we've gone from 9 schools now to 30.
We started with 10, and now we've got 30, yep.
Okay, 10. So then we have progressively added schools and increased the amount of training being done in schools. So maybe the goal could have something to do with, is it 30 for this year, Dr. Graham?
It's 30 for this year. Those schools have already been in some extensive training this summer. And I will tell you, those people move around in those schools, so the impact of that training is spread
Right.
across the district.
I like the idea of a goal based around the quality concept. and I see what has happened at Lee Memorial Health System. We're down to the very last employee. Everybody does understand what their job is, and their customer service now, from what I'm hearing in the community, is through the roof compared to what it was a few years ago. So because they are as big as we are, I know we can do it. So, I mean, my druthers would be to stick with a goal that has to do with continuing to implement quality training in the district. Now, we're doing it anyway, so I don't know how much of a stretch that is, but it
Everybody,
is important to get everyone, and that's a big task because of our mobility rate and the growth that's impacting this community.
Ms. Morgan?
Perhaps what you're looking for is something that can be accomplished within the quality process. That's a question that should be asked in the quality process.
Can you explain a little more?
Well, so you're talking about instead of, so let's say we want to look at our school and we want to see if not one school, I think you'd have to compare schools. You know, high-performing school, a low-performing school, same demographics. Why not look at the DRA? Why not look at the dollar value? And then maybe compare to, you know.
Oh, yeah,
I'm
no,
not-
I know we can do that. I'm just saying, but for today's task, look, we need that one last task.
I know, and so I guess I'm saying I would go with quality because I think that your resource allocation is something that's buried within
Yeah, I
the
agree.
quality process.
I agree. So, Ms. Dozier, then can you reread your number 5?
100% of schools will have their staffs trained in quality by the end of the 2015-16 school year.
Any objections?
Okay, when we're saying that, is that all schools? All schools, including charter?
Oh,
No, just within Dr. Graham's
Additional-
auspice and control.
Lee County Public
Lee County
School-
Public Schools.
Okay.
So we could put that in there. 100% of the Lee County Public Schools will train their entire staffs in quality by the end of the.
So all staff will be trained in quality by the end of the year, all school staff, school-based staff.
Right,
Okay.
right. And you're talking about every,
All 90 schools, 90-some schools.
all, isn't it 101 schools? With our,
special.
Special centers.
special
Any-
centers and.
What I'm hearing is any place that has instructional personnel, that's what I'm thinking of as a school, so.
Well, and I think Ms. Dozier wanted to go beyond instructional personnel to have.
Saying,
yeah,
but
that has
anybody,
them, yes.
all school-based personnel is what I'm saying,
Yes.
Will be trained.
will be trained.
What about department?
Well, you all are
The
determining what
departments-
100%
Well,
is.
departments have had ongoing training, and of
That's right.
course, we've had some turnover, and.
Saying
and I
100%.
think, well, 100% of all people?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
I mean-
fine.
And, yeah.
That's fine with me. That's
It's a
even
stretch.
greater. I agree with that.
I don't see why one part of
It's
the
a stretch, isn't
organization
it?
should be under that expectation and not. the other.
Coordinators and above were all trained this year.
Okay, so 100% of schools and departments will
Just 100% of the
train
personnel is what
their
I'm hearing.
entire staff in
Percent of personnel,
quality.
so Ms. Benzing will know what quality is, not that she doesn't already know, because she is the one who
She
holds
is the
us to
picture
a
of
very high
quality.
standard, but just holding her out as an example.
Okay.
This quality is also at the front desk when you come in the door.
Exactly,
It's at the-
exactly.
Huge.
Thank you, board members. At this point, Mr. Martin, I'd like to excuse you, and Mr. Dodig.
Mr. Toiber, before you go there, could I ask a couple of clarifying
Yes, sir.
questions to be sure? The dropout rate was discussed yesterday, that the goal was for the rate to go to less than 1%. I had understood that to be less than 1% at traditional high schools and alternative
Yeah,
learning
and
centers.
what I confirmed yesterday is that the alternative school students, their graduation, we get credited at their home school,
Okay.
so it already includes them.
And
Just
So
the
do we
13
need
high
additional
schools.
language in that?
13 traditional high
And the
schools.
yeah, because the LCs will relate back. Yes?
Well, I don't know that we got an absolute final answer yesterday from your
Dr. Spiro?
staff?
I
So
think-
I wanted to, that was one of my questions I wanted to start with today, but we went on into, and I was going to ask you, did we get the numbers for?
I thought we got 1.3% yesterday.
Oh, well, the last I heard was when you and I were talking, and I thought it was
Okay.
1.7. So you're
I thought
saying,
it was 1.3.
1.3, I think I wrote down.
somehow I didn't hear that.
But
So-
it wasn't under 1%, I know that.
So you're saying right now it's
Ever.
1.3?
I believe so. I am.
That last night, yesterday evening, we never have been under 1, ever. And then the next question?
Yes, sir. Just to try to see if I have a good reading of the intention with respect to goal number 4, let me read you, if I could, some language that I've drafted for that while you were having your discussion. This is the language I would propose. After use of a survey or other tool to measure community support, recommend a plan for establishment and expenditure of capital funding sufficient to meet district needs that is approved by the school board.
That works.
Approved by the school board's misplaced, but the plan is what they're going to approve, not the, it's a grammar thing.
I'll work on it. Thank you.
I just pulled up the dropout rate.
Okay.
You want to talk about it for a minute?
Okay, what is it?
Please.
They did not measure it last year, the state level. So what we have is 2011-12, it was 1.3. Remember, it's always a year behind. 2011-12, it was 1.3. 2012-13, it was 1.1. We don't know what it was last year. So we'll,
Still a good goal.
and we won't know this year's either. So the last recorded time we have, it was 1.1%.
And what about, did you get us the graduation rate?
Yeah, the graduation rate was 75.2% in year 13-14. We won't have this year's for a while.
Is that the 13 schools that,
That includes
the LCs as well?
that, well, ALC is already included. It's included because but that also includes the schools we're not going to include, which is why when we said 85, I didn't choke, because it is higher. It's a little higher than 80%, I think, if we take out our special centers, not the alternative schools, but the special centers. So this would be, the 75.2 represents everything, our charters, our special centers, it's everything. If you take those out, you will end up with the traditional high schools and the, which includes the alternative centers.
And you don't know what that number is?
Well, when I've reported it to the public, I believe it's always been between 80 and 82%. I have to look at the annual report because it's probably in there too. So I think 85% is a stretch, but I think it's doable. And it would strictly be the students who are on the standard diploma track in our traditional high schools.
Can you get that exact figure that was in the annual report?
I can, if someone can pull an annual report.
Just make sure
Richard,
Mr.
Dr.
Martin gets
Itzens
it
is
so
coming.
he can-
Dr. Itzens
Yeah.
got it.
Can we move on?
Any other board members? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Martin.
We'll get you that exact number, but I can assure you whatever it is, 85% will be a good challenge.
Voting? Okay, thank you. Board members, we'll now moving on to our platform development with Mr. Bob Sarah, our liaison and legislative lobbyist in Tallahassee. Good afternoon, Mr. Sarah.
Good afternoon. And I was told we'd be able to find this right off, but I'm not seeing it. Briefing meeting. Here we go. Got it. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so as we do every year, it's time to do our platform development. We started this process about a month ago. Mr. Toiber sent out a memo to all board members and staff and the superintendent indicating that we were looking for suggested changes. Over the course of the last 3 weeks, I have spoken to most of you and received input about changes that you would prefer. A lot of the input that I received was very strongly about reducing the overall number of issues and some specific suggestions about how to create the titles and get everything organized, and those are reflected in this discussion draft. This discussion draft is just here to drive your discussion and some consensus, with the intention that we'll bring this to the action meeting probably in a couple of weeks. But in the meantime, we'll also be making submissions to the Greater Florida Consortium and the Florida School Boards Association based upon the consensus of the board in order to meet their various timelines. The session is going to start this year in January instead of March, and so all of the other groups and platforms that we participate in have moved their timelines forward. So just to kind of walk through the sections, and then I think, if you have any comments, we'll take them at the end of each section, but obviously we update the date on the capital outlay issues, which are our number one priority as of last year, and I believe that still remains true for you this year. We've retitled it to Protecting Public Assets because that's the maintenance part of this is important. And we have cut down the wordiness of the description and ultimately have gotten down to just the positions that we would restore the 2 mil cap for capital outlay purposes and look at reforming PICO sources so that could come back as the primary source of supporting public school capital outlay needs. Are there any comments about that first section?
Ms. Dozier?
Reform is a very nice word. Wouldn't it be more direct if we put reinstate?
Well, PICO it's not a reinstatement. Well, Mr. Sarah, I'll let you answer that question.
PICO levels used to be a lot higher than they are now.
The PICO funding used to be higher, but the tax rate is actually the same as it always was inside of PICO. It's your dollars that have changed. The reason that PICO funding has come down is because the base that's funded has been reduced, and also because it's a bonded source. So we still have a lot of cash that's generated within PICO, but it's largely paying for buildings that were funded 10 and 15 and 20 years ago.
Okay.
But if we do come up with a stronger word, I don't have a problem with a stronger word than reform, but reinstate is not, the revenue source there has been.
Refocus, perhaps? Refocus, perhaps? Is that strong enough, Ms. Dozier?
Mm-hmm. That's better than reform, I think.
Are there any other questions or comments about this section?
Yeah.
Okay. So in the next section deals with operations funding. We've retitled it to Funding High-Quality Instruction. We've deleted the wordiness of restating for the legislature the appropriate section of the Constitution, and we're left with the 2 bullets that have been part of your platform for the last couple of years about the legislature needing a long-term plan on funding public education and looking at finding a way to collect taxes on internet sales. in a state that has no income tax and relies on sales tax. A huge portion of sales are moving from retail to internet-based, and the state has no plan to deal with that in the future.
Ms. Dozier?
This one is very near and dear to my heart. I worked on it for a year, and I'm still working on it. That first bullet where it says establish a long-term plan to make Florida's public education system world-class, instead of including, could we put to include a long-range plan to provide adequate and stable funding?
Or how about provide for an adequate and stable funding source?
That would be
Then
fine.
it wouldn't be
That would be fine,
redundant.
too. What were you saying?
Yes, the wording, establish a long-term plan to make Florida's public education system world-class in two. Would you repeat that, Mr. Teuber, what you just said?
Well, and first off,
Because we're redundant there with long
And
range.
Bob, maybe move the first part of the sentence underneath, make it funding high-quality education, and then for the sentence above, say, establish a long-term plan to make Florida's public education system world-class, including, and the first bullet would be including, and then a adequate and stable funding source, number one. And number two is pass legislation designed to collect sales tax on interbase sales, and then maybe three, take a look at sales tax exemptions. I mean, if you're gonna pull out the, I mean, if you're gonna throw it out there, you might as well throw out all the sacred cows.
And we keep hearing that they're going to do that, so we need to start that conversation again. Because we got some leverage on it, we got them looking at it, and then all of a sudden it just kind of went away. So we've got to put that back on the forefront.
The internet sales tax issue is something that a number of business groups are actually looking at and supporting because of the tax fairness between internet-based sales that have a Florida nexus where those sales taxes are collected and paid, and those handful of businesses that have no nexus to Florida at all, where those taxes are not collected unless the citizen fills out the tax form and sends in their tax personally, which I'm sure that everybody is doing. But this is, that has some high-powered supporters, even though it still hasn't been going anywhere in the last couple of years. I think I collected our comments on that, and I'll probably have a conference call with Mr. Teuber between now and your action meeting to make sure that between us that we've captured what we think was the opinion of the board, and we'll bring that back to you for the action meeting. So the next item was about respecting local constitutional authority, and we're just simply trying to shorten. And so the first bullet is about school board decisions as it relates to charter school applications, regulating charter schools that's having problems meeting local expectations, the ability to share or not share capital outlay funding, which is clearly an issue that's been on the table and is going to be on the table for the next year or so, and the ability to terminate a charter without having any other executive branch oversight. We went ahead and deleted the remainder of that, even because it's an explanation of your position as opposed to really a position in itself. And then we reorganized a couple of other items that really are about respecting your authority, where we've combined the unfunded mandates issue and the dual enrollment funding, which was really an unfunded mandate that was passed a couple of sessions ago, and rolled those both into here to have less wordiness and and fewer ultimately positions. So that's what we've done with that section. Are there any questions or concerns or comments about that? Okay, then moving on. We just explained what happened to unfunded mandates. We just moved it up into the last area on the efficient and effective state budget reforms. Based upon the comment of trying to keep the platform as tight as possible, we went ahead and looked at this as a section that could be deleted. That's something for you to provide additional feedback on, but we've gone ahead and recommending that section be deleted for that purpose. Are there any questions or comments about that?
No, good idea.
With the what was previously titled Charter School Equity, we retitled Support Fair Competition, but the two bullets remain the same. The research on the administrative fees is that districts are spending as much as 2 times what those fees are generated in order to do services that are required for charter schools. And so that means that the students that are attending our traditional public schools are subsidizing the charter schools in that way. Further, providing the equity to the traditional public schools to have the flexibility that charter schools have to waive certain laws and rules. And we have had the initiative that we've been part of through the Southwestern Alliance for School Excellence. The alliance that of the higher ed and the 5 school districts in this area.
It's the Regional Alliance.
Yes, the Regional Alliance, the Southwest Florida Alliance for Educational Excellence. Educational Excellence.
I don't know that I knew we had that big a name, but
It's just Educational Alliance.
Maybe I've got it wrong.
that's, you're talking about
But
the...
we do, but that bullet supports that initiative and the getting additional flexibility for the district from laws and rules that you could create your own policies around instead.
Yeah, the initiative was it was the innovation initiative is what it
Yeah.
was. Yeah. To be to be a region of innovation is what we asked for.
And we're still pushing that, Ms. Morgan.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, are there any initiatives that you anticipate about voucher schools? You know, we kind of took a hit on the voucher schools last time around. Should there be a reference to these in fair competition?
We certainly can have one if you would, but you would need to espouse the position. The major expansion to vouchers wasn't really this last session, it was the one before.
Right.
In particular, it's these personal learning accounts. If you have a position, and particularly if you think it's very important to Lee County schools locally as opposed to being a statewide issue. With the charter school issues, because Lee County has been very friendly to charter schools and has used charter schools to meet our local capacity needs, especially when we were growing, we tend to have these issues when the charter schools attempt to get something extra from us rather than getting the equal share from the state.
Okay, I drop it. Thank you.
Continue, Bob.
So to make it easy, I'm going to skip to the last. We know what we did with dual enrollment. We moved that up to the respecting the local authority. And so now we have restore smart accountability to replace what we had previously titled as state accountability system. Now, for discussion purposes, the first 5 bullets are not appropriate either because of items that passed within Senate Bill 1069 last year, or because policy changes that occurred in differences between how this new FSA is administered compared to what the writing exam was in the past and some of those other changes. So those first 5 bullets have largely been addressed either by changes that were made as we requested or because of the fact that the writing test is now part of the overall language arts exam and is not a separate exam anymore. So the 2 bullets that still would remain are reviewing the state assessment requirements with an eye towards reducing the total instructional time lost both by students being assessed and by those who are displaced because of test scheduling requirements. And the second would be to delay transition to computer-based testing for younger students who have not obtained significant keyboarding skills. Both of these were items that when you came to Tallahassee during the session, they were important to you. They weren't specifically in the platform, but as things developed, these were important to you, and so we've developed them for discussion purposes. If there are other issues that are important to you or the community on the accountability system, certainly they can be part of the draft, but at this point, these are the items that I've heard from you and from the district on the accountability system. Are there any questions or comments on that section?
Anyway, Ms. Fisher?
Thank you. I think you hit the nail on the head with that. Thank you.
Else? Okay. Bob, I think you have,
Nope, Jeannie Dozier.
oh, Ms. Dozier.
I wasn't going to say anything, but I've got to. I think that the first bullet there, review state assessment requirements with an eye towards reducing the total instructional time lost by, why don't we just say reduce state assessments, which,
And-
create time lost by students or something?
I would agree, because they've already, this year, they have gone to the 5%, so the argument might quickly be, well, we already gave it a
Right,
number. So
exactly.
I agree that maybe a more general, just we want it reduced even more.
Reduce the total instructional time lost.
Right.
My feeling is based on things that were discussed and the positions that the commissioner has taken in the defending the changes that were made, we have clearly limited the total amount of assessment, and yet we realize that because of the number of computers that are available and the scheduling of labs, that students are losing a lot of instructional time that's not part of this 5% of their actual testing time, and that's potentially a much bigger issue than just this 5% of total instructional time within the assessment themselves. And so it's not that we're blaming anyone, and if, in fact, some of the provisions of 1069 last year allowed districts to potentially use other staff like paraprofessionals in proctoring exams, which previously wasn't allowed. And so there may be a lot of things that we can do locally to improve on that we weren't allowed to do before, but the state should have a comprehensive look at that, because it isn't just the time lost to assessments while the student is taking the assessment themselves, but if only half the class can take the assessment at one time because of the number of computers that are available, then the other half of the class is probably displaced to the ball fields or something else during that time, because you have to have, a uniform testing environment.
Can you,
And-
Bob,
yes.
I guess the question is, from Dr. Graham and Ms. Dozier, can you make that, take out the review assess requirements and reword that to say what you're trying to say as far as the time, the ancillary time that's not being addressed in a more concise
Yeah,
manner?
I think the student displacement is, I mean, it is real, and it's never been talked about. So I understand why the inclusion there.
Ms. Dozier, what you looking for? Any more comments? Go ahead.
Well, I have one I'd like to suggest, and I apologize about not getting it to you, but looking at this one again, in fact, I started to send it in way back when, and somehow I just got lost, and I apologize about that. but adding a third bullet that says, consider allowing the use of paper and pencil assessments until such time that adequate computers and infrastructure is in place to accommodate all students.
And Bob, I didn't get any emails regarding that, but I've had several people mention that to me as well. Brought that forward as a consideration.
Well, yeah, we heard about, I don't want to get into a debate about this, but we heard about computers crashing, we heard about the infrastructure's not there, we heard about the fact that districts all across the state don't have adequate computers. How can they tell us to do something when we don't have adequate materials to do it with? We've got adequate pencil and paper. And that's the way I talk to them about that, because they can understand that. You know, how can you and your secretary both work in your office if both of you are having to complete a document, but y'all only have one computer that y'all have to go back at, or all 5 people in your office have to share that one computer? I think that's something they can get their arms around and they can understand. So,
Ms. Morgan?
I guess my question would be that, to me, that seems it's more of a school-based issue rather than a community-based issue. So what do the schools say, and what does...
I will tell you, for some districts, it's a real issue. Our district, it's less about not having the technology and more about the global infrastructure issues, because Ms. Dozier's right. We were fortunate because we waited and we let everybody else crash for a few days, and when it got better, we jumped in. But the issues that we had this year with delays due to the infrastructure of the system that the vendor promised, that was an issue. So Lee County as a whole, there is displacement, and we work with principals all the time. You got to keep instruction going, and you can't just throw kids in the auditorium. It's challenging. It's very challenging. The idea of lack of technology, we're in a much better place than many districts, but they do need to somehow address the fact that those crashes it was bad. And for some districts, it was debilitating. For us, only because we did our window, we didn't jump right at the beginning of a window. We were in a better place, and our mishaps were fewer. But it is an issue, and I think the legislators have a responsibility to hold somebody to a place. And I don't know how they guarantee that doesn't happen. But I see why it would be an issue worth discussing, or at least raising their level of awareness. So I can't believe they don't know. So I don't know how to word all that, but I understand where Ms. Dozier's going. And I'm just wondering, are we going to leave younger students just general and then let legislators define? Because I don't have the expertise to say when they would have significant keyboarding skills. Is that why you just went with younger students?
It is, and of course, the law already specifies that essentially everyone is going to be tested via computer, except for we're phasing in 3rd and 4th graders in language arts and math over a 3-year period, and it's specified which is done when. But I don't think that over that time period that we're going to be teaching any meaningful keyboarding skills. And it might be one thing to take a math exam if you're just simply typing in the final answer and it's just a handful of characters, and it's another thing to write an essay if you don't have keyboarding skills, then to be expected to write a timed essay is possible, would seem to be inappropriate. And that is something that I know that we did, that you as a membership individually and collectively talked to the legislature about when we had our legislative visits, and that was something that our tests should be assessing what they're supposed to be assessing. And if you have a language arts test, but you're really measuring how well a child's keyboarding skills are, then
Well, that was I know that was an ongoing conversation among superintendents with the commissioner as well, that we're testing keyboarding. Oh, I was just curious about the age.
So, board members put it in a,
Mine is yes.
Yes.
something to that effect?
I have notes on what
read it
Mrs.
again?
Dozier recommended, and
Would you like
if
me to
the
read it
board
again?
is is basically okay with that, then as a legislative committee, we'll get on the phone and verify that, that the draft for adoption meets that suggestion.
Okay. Good, board members? Ms.
Yes.
Ms. Dozier, one last thing you,
Well, I just said, do you want me to give you the language again? And I guess I'm asking you, you'll get on the phone with the legislative committee to see if if it satisfies, that language satisfies them. What committee are you talking about?
Well, Mr. Toiber is appointed, as you've made him your legislative
All right.
liaison,
All
so
right.
I just make sure that my notes match up with his notes
Okay.
on what was discussed here in consensus.
Small
and we'll
group.
present it back to you.
Well, all of a sudden, I'll tell you the group I'm envisioning.
Have notes, but
I
to
was
make sure that
envisioning
they match.
a much bigger group, and I was envisioning
Oh,
like
no,
ones
just-
that don't reside in, well, they reside here, but they go somewhere else every year.
It's a very efficient committee of two.
So I've got the language if you need it.
get to you after the meeting. Thank you, Mr. Sarah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob.
Want to add, thank you very much for shrinking it to, headings with a few bullets, because as legislation comes forward, it's far easier to refer to a single bullet in our platform when we're objecting to it than trying to talk about the minutia of some of the stuff that we come in with. So I really appreciate your shrinking it for us. Thank you.
And I just want to appreciate you, Bob, for the headings, which are very positive in the beginning, so I think that'll go miles. Thank you.
Dr. Graham?
If we're finished with that, I just want to give you the graduation rate and offer
I'm sorry?
I want to give you the graduation rate and offer a suggestion.
Okay, please.
Okay. It was 83.8, was a little higher than I thought. So traditionally, our increases have been 1 to 3%. So when I thought it was 82, I said 85. So if you want us to go to, it would be 83.8, so 3% would be 87, or if you want to go to 86. If you want to change that number, Mr. Martin's just waiting to hear what number, because 85% would be from 83.8% to 85. And I don't know that that's enough for you all, so I just wanted to put it out there with that goal.
So 83.8?
Yes. Last December. That was for the prior, so.
87.5?
Well, I was going to say at least
Well,
3
think
percentage
84 and-
points. At least 3 percentage points.
So you want to go, you just want to go to 87% instead of 85?
Well,
That would be 84.
We said 85, didn't we?
Right, so I'm asking, do you want to change it to
And it's
87?
8.
I'm rounding up to
So
84.
86, 87%. Yeah.
You're good with that? Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Martin, you had any others?
Well, I have the draft of the goals, if you'd like to take a look at them, confirm that they're what you desire.
Boy, he was quick. Mr. Martin was good. Well, I think she was probably already working on them. Was she already working on them? I thought so. He's so sly.
Thank you.
Can we just take a 5-minute break to look at this?
Sure. We'll take a 5-minute recess and convene in
So you would change to, if we could.
Okay, good afternoon. We are now back from recess. Board members, have you had an opportunity to review the annual performance goals for Dr. Graham?
Yes.
Yes.
Any comments or concerns? Ms. Dozier?
The last one, could we add behind training using sterling quality by the end of blah?
Mr. Martin, can you
Sterling
make,
quality principles or
Sterling
using the
quality.
sterling.
Can we
Using
just insert
sterling.
Sterling quality training?
okay? Anybody else? Okay, very good. Thank you. Moving on. We now go to executive services under Dr. Graham. We have Ms. Patty Elkin with our policy changes. Ms. Elkin.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, board members, Dr. Graham. Mr. Martin and I have brought back 3 policies. These were previously brought to the board on May 12th, but there were significant revisions, and I believe, Mr. Teuber, you had some input that you wanted considered, and you were not there at that meeting, so we are bringing them forth today. The first one is 1.07, which is the strategic plan. I know you've spent quite a bit of time, in fact, recently on the 29th, had a workshop on strategic planning, so I know that your understanding is very in-depth on the strategic plan. I'm not going to go into a lot of these changes, but it does talk about the process. Paragraph 1 talks about the rolling 3-year plan and what it will include. Paragraph 2 talks about the steering committee, and then it will be formed of community members, district members, and the board. Paragraph 3 talks about the action planning teams and the work that they will do through the strategic planning process. Paragraph 4 reminds us that at least twice a year, the school board will review the data from the superintendent. Paragraph 5 talks about by May, you will be able to have a review, and that review will happen with the cabinet and the planning teams. And paragraph 6 says that by June 30th, the superintendent will bring the data to the board, and you will have the opportunity to review and approve the plan and add that next year, as it is a 3-year rolling plan.
Ms. Dozier.
That last one, I had made myself a note, and I don't know how I missed this, but, you know, a plan is like a document that things go in, things go out, you put things in. And so that we wouldn't have to put it somewhere else, in this one, in this particular item right here, prior to June 30th of each year, the school board shall review and approve the adoption of an additional year to the strategic plan and make any additions or deletions in the plan. In other words, the current plan, any additions or deletions that need to be made, because all along, you may be taking things out of your strategic plan if you've accomplished them or rewording them. So instead of just a year, we look at the, do you see what I'm saying? Does it make
Yes, ma'am.
sense to you?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you get that language in there?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Anything else, board members? Ms. Morgan.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, as I read through this, one of the problems that you have with, that we've had with this process in the past is that interest wanes and people stop coming. So I'm wondering if there should be terms and attendance requirements, just as there are on our advisory committees. And then it says in paragraph 5, by May of each year, a team of district personnel will conduct a systematic review. Well, that assumes that we have the data from the state at that point, doesn't it? And are we going to have the data by May?
Why not?
And then it says we're going to review it by June 30th. Well, if we don't have the data, I'm not sure that I'm concerned about those dates.
And maybe what you want to do is put a date, a desired date with, and then, or as soon as available if there's,
or
because
as
like
soon
this
as
year would
the-
have been a nightmare, but hopefully
Whichever
the
is-
state's going to get on a
Whichever comes
cycle.
sooner, or whichever, whatever, okay.
Yeah, whichever is sooner.
And then what about terms and, you know?
I don't know if I'd do whichever is sooner. Have a desired date, because we're going to need time once it gets here.
Well, then maybe
So the-
30 days after the data is received from the state?
That would be generic.
Is 30 days enough time?
Yeah, once we get the data, we can pretty quick roll out what it means. I'm looking at staff.
Right,
I'm looking at Richard to nod, and I see thumbs up back there, so.
30,
Okay.
change it from a hard date to 30.
We can do that?
And then the board would be reviewing it, I guess, what,
30 days after
30
that.
days later?
Right.
Okay. So,
Ms. Fisher?
No, I'm good with this.
Ms. Dozier? Okay. Next one, Ms. Elkin.
Okay, the next one is, they're tied together. It's 1.13 and 4.04, and I'm going to defer to Mr. Martin.
The revisions to these two policies were designed to separate the function. Presently, the Chapter 1 Policy 1.13 has a number of provisions that really address the implementation of a suspension, expulsion, and alternative assignment of students that is performed by staff. And since Chapter 1 is a governance chapter, the purpose of revision is to place the governance responsibilities in Chapter 1, which is the disciplinary hearings before the school board. So some provisions from the Chapter 1 policy have been moved to the Chapter 4 policy. Some provisions have been removed because they were duplication. Otherwise, the true revisions are very small. There was one small revision in 404 to change the title of title of assistant director to director, because the assistant director position that in the past managed those student discipline issues was eliminated, so that responsibility has fallen to the director. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Board members?
Looks good.
Okay, we'll bring all three of these back for formal briefing on September 8th, along with the final two policies in Chapter 1, and then the following month we'll begin Chapter 5.
Great,
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, now moving down to teaching and learning, we have Ms. Soretta Ralph and Dr. Idle.
Good afternoon, Board Chairman, Board members, Dr. Graham, and Mr. Martin. This afternoon, we wanted to thank you first for your time to allow us to be here to review with you and share information regarding the 2015-16 State Assessment and District Progress Monitoring Schedule. You have been provided some documents ahead of time. Those documents lay out some key points regarding the state requirements. They also provide a summary schedule, which includes the estimated testing times, the testing windows, the assessments, and the times allotted per session.
Yes, good afternoon. I just wanted to say that I propose that we call this presentation "Testing is the Answer," but in her wisdom, Ms. Ralph advised me against that. So just a couple of clarifications. We're calling this a pre-briefing because, as we will look at in a moment, we are required to, after approving the testing schedule, to incorporate it into the parent guide, the code of conduct, and so that would require a briefing and a public hearing. Also, in terms of the terminology, testing schedule is the term used in statute, so we'll be referring to that. You'll see in the testing schedule that we called our district progress monitoring assessments checkpoints this year. We thought that was a good term to show the importance of checking along the way. But if I use some of those interchangeably, you'll understand. Okay, jumping right into the state requirements. We have summarized those for you, but I'd just like to briefly go over what the requirements are that we've identified. You probably heard that last spring some of the language was changed, but these requirements still remain. So Florida Statute 1008.22 indicates that we must present to you a schedule for adoption and for posting and notification of the DOE by October 1st. And it also indicates that the schedule needs to be part of the parent guide, as I mentioned. It also indicates that the requirement of public schools and students is to participate in the state testing program. In terms of progress monitoring, we have several references that still point to state requirements in that area. The statute 1008.25 requires progress monitoring in the core subject areas for students identified as being not meeting state standards. And it gives the district 3 choices for that: an IEP, an individual academic plan, or a school-wide progress monitoring plan. As you know, our students with disabilities have IEPs, but we really have preferred over the years to use a school-wide progress monitoring system rather than targeting groups of students. We have another statute that refers to schools and differentiated accountability. The statute itself does not point to the specific requirements, but rules and the documents that are used by the state to direct the requirements for DA schools indicate that we need to have progress monitoring in the core subject areas. The K-12 reading plan that the district participates in, there is specific language that we need to monitor reading for K-12 students. State Board Rule, which is 6.0331, requires the implementation of MTSS, which is Multi-Tiered System of Support. And that has far-reaching effects because there are various tiers, as you know, Tier 1 being all students and Tier 2 and Tier 3 targeted students, and it refers to using formative assessment data in monitoring student progress. And finally, we have the statute that refers to the procedures and criteria for personnel evaluation, and there is still a requirement for calculating a student achievement measure or VAM score for instructional personnel based on performance of students assigned. So that's one thing that that we are challenged with, even though, as I mentioned last spring, some of the language was taken out of some of the statutes where requiring the district to have assessments in every single course. And as you know, we have hundreds of courses, but we still have the requirement to assign part of the teacher evaluation based on their students. And finally, on that slide, we refer to common assessment. I understand that yesterday you spoke quite a bit about common assessment and how that helps with tracking standards and things like that, so I won't rehash that. But there are many studies and many of your prominent educational researchers in our era that indicate that common assessment and frequent assessment increases student achievement. On the next slide, we have what is included and excluded from the schedule itself. And I want to mention that we reviewed the formats from various districts, and the one that you see is closely aligned to the one from Seminole County School District. So the things that we have included are, of course, the state assessment windows. And we have tried to indicate that there are some windows in there that aren't necessarily required of students. They're required for the district to offer, but not necessarily required of students. And we've indicated those as needed. For example, PSAT, we're required to offer that to all 10th grade students, but it's not a requirement for the student. You'll see that the ELL, the English Language Learner Assessment, is going to be new this year. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like. We have just received an email today from the state giving us some preliminary information. We have added the testing time from that to the ELL testing time summaries, but we don't have all the specifics on that particular instrument. The alternate assessment for students with significant cognitive disabilities is also going to be new this year. It's instead of FAA, it's going to be called FSAA, and we don't have details on that at the moment. The assessments that we have as checkpoints fall into a number of different categories, but primarily you have monitoring and core subject areas for the state-tested grades and subjects. So we would have assessments at baseline or mid-year leading up to, for example, the grade 5 science test at the state level, or assessments in quarters 1, 2, and 3 leading up to some of the other state assessments that come in the springtime. We also have in here some progress monitoring assessments that are outside of the state-tested grades and subjects, primarily your K2 grades in reading and math, and we have some assessments at middle school in some of the key areas like 6th and 7th grade science, and then in some high incidence courses at high school. We encountered quite a gap at 11th and 12th grade. That is, for courses that have primarily 11th and 12th graders, we felt the need for some progress monitoring in that area as well, and also to satisfy some of the teacher evaluation requirements. Assessments that we have in the plan are based on the standards for each of the courses, and you notice that on the front page we have the estimated testing times. This is one of the required elements of this testing schedule, and you've talked about the 5% rule, so we have combined the state testing times based on what they gave us in the spring. I don't believe they're changing for this coming year, but that's what that's based on. And then we added up all the testing times for our checkpoint assessments and came up with a figure for each grade level. At high school, that was a little bit tricky because the assessments are primarily associated with courses and not grade levels, but in some cases we arbitrarily assign those to grade levels so that we could incorporate all of those assessments in the estimated testing time. In the testing estimates, we have excluded the time that a student with disabilities might need for accommodations, and the same for ELL students, since it's difficult to judge that, and that is not within the 5% or not considered in the 5% limit. And finally, there are two elements that need to be added to this testing schedule. We need to add whether the assessments are computer-based or paper-based. And I can tell you offhand that most of them are computer-based, although we provide paper copies for students with disabilities who have that as an accommodation. And we also need, at the very least, a statement that indicates that the results of these assessments will be available for students and parents within 30 days. And finally, the things that are not on the testing schedule. Any voluntary assessments like AP exams and IB exams, college placement, ACT tests, SAT tests, things of that nature. Any optional classroom or teacher-created assessments. We do not have at the moment pre-K assessments on the schedule. We are reviewing those and are considering including those as well, since I know that our Head Start program and our pre-K ESC program have assessments in place. We're just needing some time to review those. And lastly, we have not included in here the alternative testing for the third grade good cause promotion, which would be student specific.
To develop the schedule, we went through a process. We wanted to include all of our stakeholders. We asked our school administrators first because they are involved directly with it, along with our school development administrators and the teaching and learning staff. We got feedback from teachers as they came in to help develop some of the progress monitoring assessments. We got feedback from department chairs and, of course, school administrators. The plan was also reviewed and approved by our elementary, middle, and high school principals at our summer leadership conference in the afternoon session. And then the district again takes in consideration of the results of reviews by statistics consultants and correlation studies that are conducted by the district. So we wanted to include those people prior to the meeting here today. On the next slide, we have a breakdown of the next steps of the process, just as a reminder for you. As Dr. Itzen already said, we'll do a briefing on the September the 8th meeting, of which we can brief this assessment schedule again, and also the addendum for the parent guide and code of conduct. And then hopefully on September the 8th at the night meeting, we can get board approval for the assessment schedule. There will be a public hearing and board action meeting on September the 22nd for the addendum for the parent code of conduct and the parent guide. And then all of this, as Dr. Itzen already stated, has to be submitted to DOE prior to October 1. After it's all done, then we will put it on our district website, and then we will send that information out from the district to the school level so that each of our schools has the appropriate testing calendar available for their parents to review. Questions?
Ms. Dozier?
I'm actually looking at the testing schedule itself. And as I'm sitting here looking at August and September, and I see reading checkpoint star. Now, yesterday we had a conversation about checkpoints. Are these the checkpoints that you're talking about?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so what you're saying, or if I understood it correctly, is these are checkpoints that we as a district are giving, is that correct?
Yes, the checkpoints are our progress monitoring.
Okay, so I want to ask you, out here where it says progress monitoring, over to the right, state DA, what, help me to understand exactly. I know what progress monitoring is. What is state DA?
We combine the two terms in reference to the requirements for differentiated accountability schools who are required to give progress monitoring assessments in the core subject areas.
Okay, so you took two terms, combined them together. So that's what I thought the differentiated schools are, but you are going to do this process monitoring in all of the schools, not just in
Correct.
those DA schools, correct?
Correct.
We're going to use the STAR as our pre-test for all elementary students.
Okay, all right, and this is what got us into trouble last year, because when I look at this testing schedule, and I appreciate all the work that y'all have done, it is a very aggressive testing schedule. And I can see how parents get that lump in their throat and that knot in their stomach. Because when I look at this, and that we're talking about August, September, and we know that the kids don't even come back until, the middle of August. So we're really only talking about a month and a half here, not 2 months. And when you look at the amount of time, and this, all right, my question, so the checkpoint is district testing. So I got an affirmative on that.
And
These-
I want to insert, and Richard, help me, because you alluded to it. The progress monitoring, much of it is still a requirement of the state to get us ready for the standardized test, correct?
Yes, in those various statutes that I cited.
Okay, well, all right. Remember last year, you presented us with a schedule, and in that schedule, you showed us, this is what the district gives because we just want to give it. This is what we give because we have to give it because the state says we have to. And this is the one that the state says, this is a requirement because this is what we're going to use to evaluate and give you data back on your students in your schools. So, and your teachers, thank you. I just want to leave that out, because we're talking about children here, I guess I heard you say that some of these are state required. Well, when we're talking about checkpoints, we said that this is what we are doing. That's what I understood, that we are doing this, not the state. So my question to you is this reading checkpoint star, the very first one here.
Right.
Is that required by the state, or are we doing that on our own?
We are using that as a district for a couple of reasons. The progress monitoring is, and tell me if I'm saying anything that's untrue, progress monitoring is required for DA, correct? Okay.
And
For school-wide programs.
And for school-wide programs.
School-wide programs and the K-12 reading plan.
Also, we are going to use the STAR as our predictive ability for whether or not our children, particularly in grades 3 through 5, are ready for the FSA. So we need that information. And the checkpoints are going to be quick. With the STAR is a more comprehensive, but if you notice, that's the only time we're giving the STAR in August and September. It's for baseline, it's the pre-test for those grades. The other thing, I'd like you to just, if you could scroll up to there's a chart that shows the actual time spent on testing.
Now,
That might make you feel a little better.
where's the
On me,
chart?
it's scrolled,
Right above the,
right above
the
that.
schedule.
Right above. Okay, I see.
So that may get rid of some of the angst for parents. And what we're going to do, this will be on the district website, but then we're going to send each,
The chart too?
yeah. And then the levels, like if you went to Allen Park Elementary's website, they will have just elementary on theirs. All of it will be on the district website, but it'll be just on, elementary will just have elementary, so if a parent goes to their school, they'll have that.
Mr. Fisher, go ahead. Continue.
If I can ask another question, then looking at this, it says grand total of minutes testing time, and then it says grade kindergarten, 350. That's 305.8 hours. Is that, but it doesn't tell me how long. Is that for a semester? Is that for a year?
That's the whole year.
That's for the whole year. And it's a combination of, in some grades, it's a combination of the state testing and progress monitoring.
So, if I were a parent of a kindergartner and I said, how many hours or minutes will my child be expected to test this year? And you will tell me 5.8. So, children are in school 180 days, 185 days, but they will only be testing 5.8 hours in kindergarten. That's for the whole year.
That is a combination of any state-required testing or district-required testing. That would not include other things that the teacher did in the classroom.
And that was, I said, these are not, don't include like teacher quizzes, teacher things like that, which a lot of those are little 5-minute, a 5-minute warm-up or something like that. But in high stakes, let's go ahead and call it what it is.
my child is going to be tested 5.8 hours as a kindergarten student for the
Well,
entire year.
We referred to checkpoints yesterday as more low stakes, but to answer your question, yes, anything that's required by the district or the state is represented in that time.
But the checkpoints are also included in that
Yes, they
time,
are.
right?
Yes,
So
they
it's
are.
high stakes and low stakes
Yeah,
in that. So
it's all
not-
in there,
So it's
yeah.
even less of an impact.
Okay. All right.
And the reason this chart's been created is, well, one of the reasons, the state requires us to show that we are not beyond that 5%. And if you scroll all the way across through every grade level, the highest we get is 2.6%, and that's grade 12. If I'm reading it correctly. Oh, no, I lied.
No,
The highest we
3.4.
get is 3.4 in the middle.
Yep.
Now, what about 3.6 of
Well, for,
Well, that's for ELL.
ELL?
I was talking for, I'm sorry, non-English language.
Yeah, those are ELLs.
Yeah, we wanted to show the English language learner totals as well, and those are the same, except that we've added approximately 150 minutes for the English language learner assessment.
Right.
That's approximately how much time it took this past year.
Ms. Fisher?
Is that because extra time is required for our English language learners?
No, it's
Or
an
there's more
additional,
test-
it's an additional test. It was CELA, as you
Okay.
recall, and now it's going to be a different assessment, but it is in addition to all the other state tests.
Well, and I'm very glad to see this, because as I looked at, and I'm just talking, if I may, Mr. Toiber, I'm looking at the percentages, and I think this is something that is really key as we start school this year, Dr. Graham,
Yes.
because if I'm a parent and I see that only 6.6% of the year my kindergartner's going to basically be expected to sit for a test, that's going to give me some relief.
Right.
And it's going to eliminate that lump in that knot. And I think that this is very critical information that our administration has to share with our parents. Because there has been a misunderstanding
Understand.
of what
Right.
has been the expectation and what was the requirement.
Once you all approve this, there will be a very purposeful, intentional, direct communication effort at every level, from the district in the schoolhouse. We will be sure, we took the format from a county that got a lot of kudos for how they communicated, so we understand that, and there is a lot of information, and this is the kind of stuff that we will really emphasize when we do our communication effort. There's a lot of information in the legend at the end of this testing schedule that explains what things really mean. And keep in mind, and this is the first thing it says, our schedule, the comprehensive schedule, shows the window, and we will explain, you get a hold of your school and find out what days it's actually going to happen. So if it's a 2-week period, that doesn't mean for 2 weeks your child's going to be tested. So we know that it requires some education and a whole lot of communication, and we are already working on that so that people have full understanding. We just can't put it out there until it's gone through the whole process and you all have approved it.
Thank you, Mr. Toiber.
Ms. Fisher?
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions. Ms. Ralph, when you described the people who were involved in creating the plan, were there any students or parents involved?
We did not have any students involved, and this means that we had done this during the summer with our staff, and during the month of May, it will be on the agenda for the Curriculum Advisory Committee and both DAC to review also.
Okay, but there were neither of those then
ma'am.
involved in creating the
Unless the
plan?
parents were actually teachers.
Right, which many of them are. Okay, now, I noticed that we have flickers back again, so, and that's a computer-based test, right? So we are using computer testing for our kindergarten through second graders.
Well, Flickrs is not computer-based for the students. It's the teachers who collect the information and input it into a DOE web application. The computer-based testing for our younger students is STAR, or STAR Early Literacy, and that is done on the computer, yes.
Right, and that's grades 2 through 5.
Well, STAR reading is 2 through 5, and K and 1 are early literacy, and that's also computerized.
Okay, and is that done, are the teachers doing the keyboarding or the kids?
The kids are, and they go through a practice session for as long as they need to verify that they can either click on an answer, and there are usually 3 choices, or hit a number on the keyboard that would indicate their answer, 1, 2, or 3.
Do we have any information about what percentage of the kindergarten kids are adept enough to do that without long practice times?
No, I don't have that information. The way the testing is set up is that they have to get to a certain point in the practice in order to go on to the test at all. So
Okay. So if they don't?
So I do not have the statistics on if or how many students are not able to do it right now.
Have we asked the kindergarten teachers?
No, but we can get that information.
Definitely will.
No one's able to proceed with the assessment until they've gotten to the level they have to get to. And again, this isn't keyboarding as much as point and click for the little guys.
I understand that,
Okay.
yeah. So then when we're doing flickers at kindergarten level, then the teacher is sitting with the student,
Yes.
collecting the information and then entering it.
For flickers, yes. As a matter of fact, they've reduced the kindergarten screening to an observation instrument, so the teacher is actually collecting those observations and ratings over a period of 30 days, and then entering them into the computer.
Okay, so it won't be like it was last year where they were sitting individually with the student for up to 45 minutes to enter that information.
That's my understanding, that the student is not involved in that at all.
Okay, thank you.
Wondered where that was going.
And let's see what else. Okay, so then I see we have some, in October, we have some civics EOC as needed, which would be retesting, right? Or
Correct.
FCAT or FSA. Okay, so when those kids are testing as needed, that means that some of the students are testing and some are not. What about the other kids then, who are not testing? Are we having them in the auditorium or the cafeteria, or are they losing class time? Or have we rectified that situation?
I don't know if I'm the appropriate person to answer that, but it was referred to earlier. It's a challenge for our schools, and I know that that schools deal with that in different ways.
Retakes are not a school-wide effort.
Right.
Okay, so those who have to retake are gathered together, and
Right.
there is staff that proctors those exams with them, so instruction continues in the classroom for the other students. So it's not even, in most cases with retakes, it's the retakers who are displaced. They're taken out of the classroom, rather than they stay in the classroom and then everybody else has to do something else. So, because retake is not the majority of students, we hope in most cases. So retake as a whole, it's a different feel and look in a schoolhouse. They're put together, and now that they have, the law has allowed for paras even to proctor in some cases, so we will have a greater number of staff people available to do the retakes. But I can tell you as a former principal, when there were retakes, the disruption to the whole was much, much less than during a full-blown school-wide testing period.
So then we're certain that we will not have, when kids are doing retakes, and say there are 21 kids taking FCAT reading 2.0,
Okay.
they go to a
Lab.
computer lab where there are enough stations to accommodate them. And so now they don't have to be monitored by a certified teacher. It can be.
Well, I don't know. I can only tell you that some, I don't know which tests were allowed to use pairs and which were not, so.
Okay,
But they will be proctored by someone,
right.
based on what's
Okay.
required. What is it you're wondering?
I'm wondering if we're going to have a repeat of what we had before for the last several years, which is that when a certain group of kids are testing, other kids are displaced. So their classroom is being used, or, and then they have to go somewhere else for a period of time, and during that time, there is no instruction taking place. And that was one of the big
I can-
problems and complaints, and I'm just wondering how that's been addressed.
I can tell you that with retakes, the displacement should be minimal. I can tell you that it has been the direction of this superintendent that instruction continue regardless of who's testing. And the situations where we were told that there were groups sitting in a room somewhere, those have been addressed school by school. So what I can tell you is the expectation is very clear that, and there are going to be 1 or 2 days where it's going to be very challenging, but as a principal, I will tell you, instruction continued in my building no matter who was testing, and it is doable. It's more work. And that's the conversation we've had with principals. It's harder to schedule, but it can be done, and that's the expectation that it will be done. So retakes, though, it's not nearly as complicated, and the children, I'm trying to think why anybody wouldn't have instruction continuing during retakes. So if you have an example of that, you need to tell me, because I would want to address it.
And it's been a while, but when I was at a high school and there were retakes, there were high numbers of kids. Our auditorium was full of kids.
Well, and I'm not, I don't know the numbers, but I'm telling you that in the last 2 years, the expectation has been, and we have addressed singular issues as they've come to our attention, instruction is to continue to the highest level possible when children are testing. And retakes, the numbers are smaller than when the whole school is testing. And so we, in the case of a computerized test, those children are going to be placed in a lab, and it may have to be cyclical depending on the number of labs, but the focus is on instruction continuing. Obviously, the kids that are testing are going to miss some instruction. The
Okay.
retakes, yeah.
Now, regarding the retakes for the FSA, we don't have a valid test yet, but we know if we have, it's yes or no, or pass or fail. Somehow we know that even though the test has not been validated
Somehow.
or supposedly scored. So we're going to be doing retakes before we even have the scores on a valid test that we took last spring. Help me understand how that works. I mean, really, it's, because we're offering the retakes in the fall before the scores even come back, or before the test is valid, which concerns me greatly. So how do we
You want to share any
How do we
wisdom based on what the
talk to
state's
people who ask us
communicated?
about that?
Well, I'm not sure I can really help with that. The state has decided that they needed a validation study, as you know, and at the same time, they released the pass-fail on a test that they have not, quote-unquote, validated yet. So we're at the mercy of what the state plan is at this point. They have published these retake windows, which we're obligated to honor. So we do know the students that the state has deemed to have failed the grade 10 ELA assessment and the Algebra 1 EOC assessment. So those are the students who would potentially retake the tests.
And that validation study is required to be completed by September 1st.
Correct.
And the state has suggested that they will have a quick turnaround to be able to give us more information, but the schedule for retakes has been set by them. And I understand your question, and it's unfortunate that we don't have a better answer. We are sharing information with you as quickly as we are getting it, which is why it's been this summer you've gotten more than what you usually get, which is just one, this is everything that happened and this is where we are. We've had to give it to you, so we've received it, and we have received it a little bit at a time.
Right. Now, this is an observation from me as a board member and a representative of the community, as an educator, as a parent and a grandparent. It's more than concerning to me that, or more than unfortunate, that we are doing all this because we're at the mercy of the state, who has not got their act together. I mean, I just, personally and ethically and morally, I have a real problem with this. And so I don't know how I can even begin to support this. And this is not, I understand how hard you all work, and this is not a personal observation that is critical in any way of our district staff or of our, but it's critical of the state, who are putting us by law at their mercy and doing damage to our kids. Really? And we're doing this? I don't understand.
I don't know how to go from there. So,
I'm not sure I understand.
Ms. Morgan?
We've just covered so much territory. I'm not sure I understand exactly.
It's the reality of what's really happening.
What I'm hearing is some consternation about having to adopt a schedule, which we're required to adopt, based on dates that may or may not come with data that we ought to have before we give those tests. Is that, am I translating?
Well, yeah, based on the fact that the powers that be at the state level are telling us what we need to do when they don't even know what they're doing. I mean, it's beyond the point of ridiculous. And I'm sorry if I sound like I don't understand, but I do not understand how we can go through these motions and do this to our kids. Makes no sense.
And I'm just going to encourage you, and I've said this before, we are part of a very large consortium. And I think we need to take advantage of that. And I know that we've got legislators that want to meet. And I don't know that they know the nitty-gritty of what this really plays out to look like. So
Sure they don't.
when do we have to have the plan? It has to be submitted by October 1st?
Has to be board approved.
Calendar has to be board approved by October 1st. So that's where we are.
Well, we meet with our consortium the last weekend of this month, right?
Correct. And when is this planning on coming back?
September the 8th.
So that would be,
And let me just ask, aside from that, which is not minor, that matters, is there anything about the schedule or the format or anything you want to give feedback so when we do bring it back on the 8th, if we want to address those?
I think it's very complete and comprehensive, and if it made any sense, and if the direction was coming from an entity that had a real secure plan and program in place, it would be fine. But then there is the reality of what's really happening at the school when this is happening, because it looks like it's all cut and concise. But the reality is that there are schools who don't have the technology or don't have the staff, and that kids are being displaced. And darn it, I mean, we cannot be working towards student achievement when the kids aren't in class being instructed. So that's,
And I think you're
That's
doing
my
what you can do
concern.
based on what you just put in your platform, asking that portion of all this to be addressed. But I will assure you again, we are doing everything we know how to do to minimize any displacement of our students.
thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, at this point, Ms. Ralph, you go right into the District Accountability Schools Performance Review.
You all have asked for this, and we asked you to wait until August so we would have data available from our fifth quarter efforts and other areas. And so this is to talk to you about how we are working directly with our differentiated accountability schools that we call DA schools. And I think you're also going to address the state's lowest 300, correct? Okay, yeah. Okay.
Is this on? Okay. Good afternoon, Board Chairman, Board members, Dr. Graham. I'm here today, along with my colleagues, to talk with you about differentiated accountability and the state's lowest 300. When we look at this list, you'll see that there are 12 schools. They are all elementary, 1K through 8 schools. But the thing that you need to know is there are actually 2 designations going on here. Thank you. Schools that were in the lowest 300 scoring schools in the state of Florida, and schools that received a grade of D or F through state testing. Although many of them are in both categories, it's important to note that Lehigh Elementary is in the lowest 300, but it is not a DA school. Likewise, you will see that Sunshine, James Stevens, and Mirror Lakes are not in the lowest 300 schools. So although we talk about them, we just say DA, I wanted you to know that there is a difference there. When we look at this next slide, we had a group of principals come together and talk about what they thought were the most difficult challenges for schools to face. And they identified 8 things. Excuse me. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these with you, but I would like to just make some comments. Title I, poverty. But the thing that the principals thought was the most difficult was when those schools hit 90% or more. And many of our DA schools are in the 97, 98% poverty. The next one is the mobility rate of the students, ESE, a preponderance of ESE, and SB classrooms, which takes a lot of time in terms of meeting and paperwork. Size. We don't often think about this, but that's a huge factor to schools when you think about the services that those schools require. As an example, would you rather be a reading coach in a school of 400 and serve 400 students, or a reading coach where you're responsible for 1,200 students? Sometimes we have difficulties in K through 8 schools also getting people who want to do a 9-year span, particularly in elementary school. The next one is hard to staff, as identified by the district, a large ELL population, and then the sanctions that come from the state. Just to let you know, all the DA or the lowest 300 face at least 4 of these challenges. Most of our schools face 1 or 2. We have about 5 schools that have 3. Okay, well, you've been progress monitored to death today, so I'll just go through this part real quickly. We utilize checkpoints. Let's talk about progress monitoring real quickly. It's required by the state, but it's required in all elementary schools for diagnostic purposes. It is not to give a grade. It is to inform teachers about student mastery. Where do they need to reteach? And again, I've got it on this next slide. Results are ungraded in our elementary schools. I think that's important. Nothing high stakes about it. But this is what it lets us do. It monitors reading growth and mastery. And I have to report that to the state for the DA schools. But we monitor this in all elementary schools. And we can get district, school, class, and individual student level data from this. And it has to be vetted by the state. That's very important. It's done through the Department of Just Read Florida, and there is the research on STAR to approve it. Math and science are progress monitored through checkpoints that we have developed and aligned with the Florida state standards. And what they do is check proficiency, student gains, and proficiency from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. Again, diagnostic only, tells us where the kids are, no grades. What do we use this progress monitoring for? Reteaching within the classroom and to provide enrichment within the classroom, to plan and develop daily intervention groups. Every single DA school and most elementary schools have a daily intervention period. This allows classroom teachers to instruct during the day on class grade level standards. They're not consistently having to move back and address the standards the kids haven't mastered. They do that in intervention groups, and that's the way that we're working to close that gap, giving them grade level instruction and bringing children up through these intervention groups. We also set goals and action plans for both teachers and students. In all the DA schools, we are very honest with the kids about where they are and what they need to do, and we often set goals for them. This also helped us prepare for the 5th quarter summer program and for 3rd grade reading camp, which we'll talk about. I just want you to know again, these checkpoints are based on Florida state standards. We've already told you they had an 87% accuracy rate in predicting those lowest quintile 3rd graders. That was great for us to learn, because that way we know we're on the right track. Now, the unfortunate part about this is that information on the FSA test and scoring has been subject to frequent change and is limited, going to some of your comments. We have to remember that the state says GAIN scores will not be utilized this year to determine school grades. We had 3 schools exit DA last year, all based on GAIN scores. So you can see in DA schools that that's a hard blow. And the state has not yet announced how these grades will be calculated. Okay, specific district support. There's been a lot of it. I'm very appreciative for what Dr. Graham and the cabinet have done. Above formula staffing is necessary. A great example is James Stevens. James Stevens has never had a large enough middle school component to run a full middle school program on the DRA they generate. So each year, the district has provided James Stevens with additional DRA so that we can staff that full middle school program there. HR cooperated and gave us an early hiring window for DA schools, hoping that we could get them staffed. Dr. Graham introduced teacher incentives for highly effective and effective teachers to go to DA schools. Turnaround principals incentives. We have new turnaround principals at Mirror Lakes and at Colonial this year.
Excuse me, on the incentives to go for teachers to go to those schools, are those permanent moves, are those temporary moves?
Well, that's up to the teacher,
Do they have the right to go back to their initiating school?
not during the year that they agree
No,
to
I mean,
move.
but after, for
Yeah,
like,
teachers have the ability by contract to go where they want to from year to year. So it's a year-by-year request. I can tell you that those that moved last year, my understanding is many of them are staying. But we ask for a 1-year commitment at a time, because that's all we really can ask.
thank you, continue.
Okay. Subject area specialists, in the past, and I'm talking about subject area coordinators, they have really been more of a central office personnel, district office. Those people are out in our schools all the time. This year, thanks to Title I, we have been able to get some additional coaches, and they are going to be assigned to specific DA schools. We have even had some of these subject area coordinators and specialists act as substitutes in our DA schools when we have not been able to get permanent personnel. We've had very targeted professional development. We've done some very specific training in ELL because we have such a large population in the DA schools. Fifth quarter, which was a wonderful addition for the DA schools. And I also want to say that Title I has given us SIG subs. In many of our schools, especially places like, let's say, Mirror Lakes, that is quite a distance away, we have gotten permanent subs so that if a teacher is sick and we can't get it filled, we have a sub right there on the staff. Okay, next one, specific assistance from the turnaround director. I've done a lot of problem solving with district departments in terms of how we help. For instance, I mentioned the above-level staffing with James Stevens, different things like that that I take to them, specific classroom needs, specific building needs, Title I, and their assistance with us with these additional coaches that will be assigned to schools. I have attended parent conferences, IEP meetings, SAC meetings. I have helped set up and I monitor these intervention periods that we have in the schools. I have interviewed and helped to recommend personnel, guidance with the principals and school organization, and in employee concerns. I do walkthroughs in all of my schools and invite other district personnel where we do follow-up on professional development and to verify best practices. I hold DA meetings with our DA school principals where we do share topics, look at our data, and I do school data analysis. I look at those checkpoints and see how we're meeting our goals. Then I work through all the issues with the state, and then I advocate a lot for my schools. Our progress monitoring results this year on DA schools. We set goals, just as I told you we did through progress monitoring for our schools. 5 schools, all DA schools, met their end of the year STAR goals by February of 2015. Bonita Springs, Orange River, Manatee, Lehigh, and Franklin Park. All of our elementary schools had gains, but these 5 schools met their end of the year goals.
And I just want to say it's notable that the schools that did it were the DA schools, which indicates to us the support that they're being given and the work that's going on in those schools is targeted and is making a difference.
The next one that you're going to see is the 3rd grade ELA lowest 20%. And that's a comparison between last year and this year. But I want to caution you here. Different sets of kids, different tests. Last year it was FCAT, this year it's FSA. Different 3rd graders last year, different 3rd graders. So you can see, some places lost. I mean, in other words, they were able to move children out of that lowest quintile, and other schools this year and other schools gained. The next one is 5th grade science. Those are the only scores that we got back. Same thing, a mixed bag here for science. Some schools made gains in their science scores. Some students didn't. Now, in this case, again, 2 different groups of students. It is the same test, though. We had FCAT both years. So, now we're going to move on to our summer programs.
The next chart you're going to see, the next chart you see has our schools that were our hosts for our summer reading camp for our 3rd graders. When we received the list from the state that Martha referenced for the lowest or the bottom quintile, we had 1,300 plus students that were on that list. Some of those students had actually already met good cause exemptions at their schools through the SAT 10 or through their portfolios. But we ended up with 500 students out of Lee County that attended our third grade reading camp. The 11 sites that are listed are our 10 fifth quarter sites, plus we also had Patriot to host our students in the West Zone. So we had 11 sites, we had 500 students attend. The students were encouraged to attend the 25 days of camp. Some already had plans and of course were not able to attend all days. During those 25 days, they had approximately 4 hours of instruction that was both individualized, group instruction, independent activity, and group activity, but it was all around reading for the third graders, for the third grade reading camp. The chart shows the schools and their percentages of students that were able to master the SAT 10, and as a district overall, we had 45% of our students that were able to master the SAT 10 and receive good cause exemption to move on to fourth grade. The next chart you'll see shows you a comparison over the last 3 years. I think this is important for you to see because first we're talking about 2 different tests, but you can see the huge gain that we have made in those 3 years. We also have an increased number of students that are attending third grade reading camp or that are qualifying for third grade reading camp. And I will also tell you, we had parents, even if their child met a good cause exemption, to call and want to participate. So there is the need to continue to want to be involved in that. They really want that additional help. With a 45% increase, that is a huge increase over 3 years. So I feel like it is something that we need to celebrate. While I'm always a believer in to celebrate your successes, but then you move right on and what do we need to do to ensure that we don't have as many students that are needing that additional help. But we did make some huge gains this year. So I do want to thank the families, the staff members, and the department for the curriculum that they created. I think we had a great dedication. So I think it was very, very successful.
Ms. Ralph, you said a 45% increase, but I think what you meant is that
45%
Okay.
passed,
But
sorry.
we've had an increase from 34% last summer to the 45%.
Sounded better the other way, though.
Well, it did, but it wasn't true. So, so we went from 34% last summer to 45% in the reading camp.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Jeannie?
Okay, as you know, we had a new initiative this year, which was the fifth quarter. It was implemented this summer to support the 10 district schools that were in the lowest 300. There's a great deal of evidence out there that says that student skills and knowledge often deteriorate during the summer months, and that children of poverty often lose even more. So our goal was really to prevent summer learning loss when we thought about the fifth quarter. Students in grades K through 4 who were considered below proficiency in reading were identified to attend the summer program. Principals were also given the opportunity to enroll students that were borderline, but that they felt would benefit from attending. So approximately 61% of our target group attended the program. It was a 25-day program that was scheduled from 8:30 to 12 each day with breakfast and lunch included. We used a pre- and post-test model to monitor student progress, again using the STAR and early STAR results, and you can see that on the slide. This is based on the averages of 996 students who attended 70% or more of the program and had a pre- and post-test score. The results that you're seeing reflect grade equivalent scores. A grade equivalent score show how a student's test performance compares with other students nationally. If you look at the first line, for example, you're going to see that overall kindergarten students scored a 0.7 or in the 7th month of kindergarten on the pre-test. At the end of the program, the average score was a 0.8, suggesting a 1-month gain. As you look down, you'll see there were many gains for those students that attended fifth quarter. Again, the goal was to prevent summer learning loss, and research would support that children would be expected to regress over the summer. So based on this information, we stopped that regression and met our goal. Then we had students in K, 1, 3, and 4 that actually made gains, so we look at that as icing on the cake. Our expectation would be that over time, we would see some trends indicating that summer programming could make a large difference in the achievement levels of our lowest performing students and actually start bridging the achievement gap. We'll be looking closer at these results to determine what we can do to improve should we decide to continue this initiative. Overall, however, we feel confident that we have almost 1,000 students that are at our neediest schools and are ready for the new year.
Okay, where are we going? What are we going to do for DA schools? What's ahead for them? All DA schools will remain in their current status for next school year. They have said there will be no changes even when the school grades come out. This year's school status will change solely on proficiency, as determined by this test in 14-15. Also, regardless of those scores, the lowest 300 in reading will retain their status for FY16. So, we know that there will be no changes in any of the schools in either program. Okay, so what are our plans as a district for FY16? We are so excited about the district tool that we have created to track student mastery standard by standard and be able to move along with children. These daily, individually targeted intervention periods, we're getting stronger and better at that all the time. We're so excited about our additional specialist support. We're adding a few pieces of professional development. One of the things that I have encouraged the schools to do, they're not all quite ready because they have many new teachers this next year, is departmentalization. When I looked across the state at the schools that were in DA that made the most improvement, many of them were departmentalized. And that makes a lot of sense, at least in 4th and 5th grade. If you're a secondary teacher, you generally have 1 or 2 sets of standards to learn. You might teach 2 subjects in a really bad year 3. Our elementary teachers are asked to learn the standards and teach 5 subjects: language arts, writing, math, science, social studies. That is a tremendous amount of work. And we know that it affects the quality of planning. By limiting the number of standards that the teacher is having to work with, we can improve the instructional planning and hopefully improve instruction. Utilizing that Gallup data has been very important to us on teacher and student engagement, and let us look at our DA schools and see where we need to make some changes in their working goals. And we are very hopeful that we will be able to continue with 5th quarter. Thank you.
Board members, questions? Ms. Morgan.
First question. Dr. Graham, how many times have you visited these schools this year?
Well, I have visited a number of schools. I couldn't tell you. I don't go to, let me say it this way, any school I visited, it was probably once during the school year.
Okay.
I can tell you that Mrs. Hayes is in them continually.
Yeah, I'm just really more interested in your involvement. Let's see, where do I start? Okay, proficiency for 5th grade science. What accounts for, or what do you attribute to, the increases in proficiency at Colonial, Lehigh, and Manatee, if I'm reading the chart correctly?
Well, before you answer that question, is there a reason why the data, Ms. Morgan has a picture of the data, we don't have the data in the data you presented on your presentation does not match the data that's in our briefing report. I can't pull up the data you have, doesn't match.
I pulled this right off the PowerPoint. I mean, What, the
Agenda backup.
I don't have, for example, this
documentation for the briefing? This, I just printed it.
oh, because that you, as you were going through the slides, I couldn't find it on on our presentation.
It's all here.
Sorry, I don't know because I send the PowerPoint and then it is distributed, but it was within the PowerPoint. I don't know.
Page 60.
Yeah,
1, 2, 3, 4,
61,
5, 6,
2,
7,
from
8.
Are you talking
60s
about,
on.
Mr. Toiber, the science scores and the,
Beyond, all these charts appear.
Do you not have those? You are kidding.
I've got, mine stops at 60. I like, for example, this FY16 plan, I don't have it anywhere in the,
Good.
You have a different, you're working from a different thing than I am.
well, I'm
so
working from the one that's on our,
Your screen looks different than
on the
mine.
drive.
Anyway,
Are you,
Continue on.
okay, so Mike, am I reading this correctly that there were significant gains in proficiency at Colonial Lehigh Manatee in fifth grade science? Is that correct? Am I reading, I mean, sometimes the change is positive and sometimes it's negative in looking at these graphs, so I had to.
positive means that more kids went
proficient.
into the lowest quintile, and negative means more children came out of the lowest quintile.
Okay, but I'm looking at fifth grade science. It says
In other words, if you
Lehigh, 34% were proficient in 13-14, 42 were proficient in 15-16, which is a gain of 8%.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm thinking about third grade. I'm sorry, that is correct.
Okay,
Well, now, I
so,
will tell you, and I cannot tell you right now, are you familiar with P-Cell, what it is? P-Cell is a science program that is designed for students with ELL backgrounds, and I know Colonial is a P-Cell school. I would have to go back and look. We had very mixed bags throughout the different district in science scores. However, when we looked at those scores, the P-Cell schools showed the best gain of any of the schools.
so now Bonita, which had a decline in proficiency, they don't use the P-cell? No, okay. I guess, there's so many questions. You've identified in Appendix C, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, these 8 categories, factors that challenge schools.
Mm-hmm.
Have you identified strategies to tackle those particular factors? Have you looked at what other states or districts do to address some of those things, or do you just look
Yes, we've done
internally?
a lot of work to look at those strategies. I'll give you an example. One of the things that I'm looking at in terms of mobility, I'm on the Student Assignment Committee. Some of that has to do with how students are assigned, and let me give you a piece here. James Stevens Middle School has our highest mobility rate in the district, and that's the reason because it has the most open slots in the East Zone. So it's kind of like a revolving door for James Stevens because where we're tight on slots, they wind up at James Stevens. The same thing has been true with Manatee. We've also discussed in that doing what we did, I'm a proponent of this, of limiting the number of transfers that parents can make in 1 year. Edgewood Academy has a 54% mobility rate. I mean, stop and think about that. That's a half a new classroom every single year. So those are some things we look at where we can control them. Poverty rate, one of the things that committee has been talking about, and I can't tell you what's going to happen, but having a different plan someday in the future for elementary schools than they have for middle and high. And that's a student assignment plan that's not based on zones. Because right now, the way our zones are, we have all of our poverty schools mixed in one area. So that's just something that they're going to talk about. So that's one thing. I mentioned for schools with high ELL, Research proves that the PSYOP has been the most effective program in helping ELL students. So we're doing training for our schools with high ELL populations. Inclusion is one of the things that I worked on with Mr. Ferguson about including more students rather than isolating them in specific schools where we had a multitude of self-contained programs. So yes, we are doing things to address those issues.
Great, thank you. I guess that's it for me. Thanks.
Anybody else?
I just have a couple of quick questions. First of all, when you said that we were limited by some of the state things, you put that a lot more eloquently than I did, so thank you. The daily intervention period, how long a period is that?
It runs anywhere from 30 minutes in some schools to almost an hour in other schools, and it deals with both enrichment for students who need it and also with mastery, non-mastery.
As we talked yesterday with our student tracking tool, that will be a constant changing group so that we will always be able to address those students that are at risk or having difficulties.
Okay, great, thank you. Can you just describe for the purpose of the audience where we get the money for the additional DRAs and the incentives that we offer to teachers who go to hard-to-serve schools?
Well, I have to thank Amy for that. Dr. Desamore was very well aware of some of the issues that we face. We've also had help from Title I. You know we can't supplant, but that's why they have been able, and we've also had help in the area of additional TIF teachers that have been written into the grant. So it's from different grants and also Dr. Desamore looking at how things are done.
The big picture is it's about our resources being allocated, and when Dr. Desamore allocates for schools, she knows she's going to allocate at the beginning based on a given number, but she has budgeted, so as needs come forward, there is a way to work through all that. As far as incentives, Dr. Adkins, labor management, there are multiple tentacles to being able to provide the extra resources that we have to provide.
Thank you.
Ms. Morgan?
Well, okay, so given the conversation about resources, essentially what I'm looking at for these schools is a mixed bag. Some significant gains and some significant losses. So net, I guess the question is, have we learned anything from the gains and what are we tackling in terms of the losses? But then my question for the superintendent is, what happens when TIF goes away?
Well, and I think we talked to you all when we looked at TIF. First of all, the things that are working in TIF, we're going to have to begin to figure out how we're going to sustain those things and eliminate things that we may be doing now that we're going to have to switch some things out. And we're looking at all of that. We have 2 years left in the TIF grant, and then we know that we're going to have to work through this year, next year.
Yeah.
Correct? I'm not making that.
17 is when it runs out, right?
So we know, and we are also looking at other grant opportunities, but we're very clear. What I'm sensing is the question is, are we paying attention, or do we have a long-term plan? And the answer to that is yes. We are looking at every time we get data like this, it drills it down a little further. Okay, so for instance, why did that school do better in science than the other? And that's how we discovered it's the P-cell that's making a difference in the schools that seem to be making the gains. So that leads us to, okay, then perhaps P-cell needs to be in all those schools. So those are the kinds of things that every time we get more data, we look at our plan and determine what we need to insert in the academic plan and what we need to insert in the strategies that we will use moving forward. So none of this is being ignored, I guess. And we know the TIF grant isn't forever, and that's why we are very clear that what's working in that grant, we've got to figure out a way to sustain practically.
Dr. Graham, also keep in mind that this year Title I is using the TIF model with with the remainder of Title I schools.
Thank you.
Ms. Fisher?
I think the other thing that we need to think about, if we look at those science grades, because they're two different groups of children, you could actually have a group that scored lower than the group did last year, but they actually made gains. Are you following me? So this one slide does not give the whole picture, which is one of the reasons that we are so excited about standards mastery with these kids. So we will have definitive at each child.
So we'll start to see some real impact
Right.
next year, and if not, then we should be very concerned.
Yes, you're exactly right.
Ms. Fisher?
Yes, and then I think you did a presentation once before where you explained to us how that happens, how the group appears to score lower, but yet the kids in the group have made gains. Okay. And I'm looking at these two charts, and the one with the fifth grade science was percent proficient in 13-14 and then 15-16. Or 14-15, well, it says 15-16, so I guess
Oh,
that's a
okay.
typo. Okay.
It should have been 13, 14, 14, 15. I
Right.
apologize.
And then with the FSA third grade, okay. When we have that mixed bag, and we have some more kids in the lowest quintile, and we have less kids in the lowest quintile at different schools, have you looked at the mobility rate of those particular schools?
Yes, we
also?
have.
And has that mobility rate research included not only the students, but the staff?
Yes, it has.
Okay.
And I will tell you right now how difficult it is to staff many of our DA schools. We currently have 36 openings in the total number of DA schools. And as I said, we're making plans for that now. I do have to say, and I looked at this very carefully, we know Dr. Adkins has confirmed that the majority of our teachers live in the Cape. The majority of our schools in DA are in the East Zone.
Right.
That right there causes a hardship for us in terms of teachers wanting to travel, which is one reason that we did the incentives. So when we look at that, we have to look at a variety of factors, and we have. So,
Well, and I think the incentive is a realistic way of getting people who have the desire to work with that population and are willing to do the traveling.
I also
I
have to
think
tell
the
you.
return on investment's probably a good one.
Right.
Yeah.
I also have to say, and I have to be honest with you, that we've lost a couple of teachers recently in our DA schools, particularly in the area of ESE due to salaries concerns, that we've lost them to other places. So that has also been an issue for us.
Ms. Morgan?
Yeah, this is sort of an off-the-wall question, but given that your biggest problem is in one particular part of the district, given that you have a disconnect between seats available and, well, not a disconnect, but you have more seats available than you have students, has any thought been given to, within that particular area, treating that as its own district and figuring out a way to tackle some of the problems in that district? For example, if we're spending extra money to keep the middle school part of James Stevens going, does that really make sense? I'm just thinking of things like, do we need an all-boys school? Would that, have we thought about really going off the chart and creating a district charter or doing something like that? If some of our problems are targeted in a specific, are centralized in a specific area, are we thinking about the specific area as opposed to as a solution to the problem as opposed to being a big part of the problem?
We are continuing to look at our student assignment. The first thing we've had to figure out is how is that impacting, where do these variables come from? And part of it is how we assign. Part of it is James Stevens Middle School has never been big enough to be a middle school, the 6-8. I'm not sure, I wasn't here when the K-8 was created. I don't know what the research was to back that, but I can tell you pre-K-5. And so to answer your question, all of those conversations are occurring. We are trying to look at different alternatives. And so consider off the table as far as figuring out a way to improve what's happening in those schools. But there are some very practical issues, as Ms. Hayes said, where our teachers live versus where we have the biggest challenges. The mobility rate in some schools versus others. I know Ms. Fisher has been very concerned about mobility rate of teachers, and there are multiple variables for that. So we actually even tried today when we were working on goals to figure out a way to incorporate that in a goal, and there's the range is so broad, so wide for where teachers go and why they go there. We were trying to come up with how do we find a mean or a target number, and we couldn't do it today, so we're going to continue to look at that. But to answer your question, all of these things are being looked at and talked about, and not just among us. We're looking at the research to determine what can we do differently. Some of our issues we've created ourselves, and I think that's part of what we're trying to resolve. How do we fix them?
There are districts with the kinds of populations we're talking about that are successful.
And I would suggest that we are making gains, and we have our own level of success, and we are looking at like populations, like demographics, to determine what they are doing. These things don't happen overnight, and the conversations have been going on for 2 years, and changes have been made that are making an impact. And it's going to be ongoing.
And Steve, Mr. Turner.
Ms. Dozier, I'm sorry.
Well, I think I can give you a little bit of history on James Stevens and why it is the K-8 school that it is. I can't believe that there was nobody here that could give you that information. That school was a failing school, and it was on the verge of being closed by the state. And we had to do something to reconfigure the school. And as you know, you have to get approval from the state.
Right.
You have to put a plan together and let the state know what your plan is. And that's why that school is a K-8 school today. If you go back a little bit further and you remember, we took the Michigan K-8 school and we closed that school. We brought those students in over there. So you meshed two populations, plus you put, the students that were, because that used to be just a middle school.
Right, Lee.
Right.
Right.
Lee Middle School is what, Lee Middle School is what it was called. And so when you brought those students over there and the others, that was the way we ended up not closing the school, because I can tell you, and I can't remember how long that's been, but I remember that community was very, very concerned over the fact that school might be closing, period.
Right.
And and I know that.
I mean, it's a conundrum. But if you look at the data for that particular school, K-5, things are humming right along. But 6-8, we are struggling. And so we've got to find an answer to that. And with it's like our small schools really have to work hard to maintain the caliber of scores that they maintain. When you're smaller, there's still that expectation that everything's there, when in fact it's much more difficult to offer everything all the others have because of the small staff, the small numbers. It's just it's a different set of challenges. So thank you for that history.
Ms. Fisher?
Okay, back to the teacher mobility and the conversation. A while back, we had asked about exit interviews. And so I was wondering if we're at the point where we're getting that kind of information when people are leaving.
We do exit interviews if they're leaving the district. They are voluntary, and they are anonymous, so we can't necessarily attach them to a school. We don't get exit interviews for teachers who change schools.
Okay.
But yes, we are doing that.
So then, I mean, because talking to those particular people would probably render a wealth of information. And then on the 6-8 piece where we're struggling with James Stevens and some of the East schools, a while back in another history lesson, we did the magnet thing. So I wonder if there was some kind of an attractor there for that particular, the 6-8 population. A sports academy or some kind of a draw for people to want to put their kids there, if that might be a way of increasing the population of the middle schoolers and also, giving the school a chance to continue to grow. But I want to thank you for the work that you do, and Title I for sharing the money. Thank you.
Ms. Morgan?
I'm just going to throw one phrase out there, Minority Male Maker Academy. You're looking for a middle school concept?
Say it again.
Minority Male Maker Academy.
Ms. Dozier?
And I would certainly support that, and I will tell you why. Because where they have done that, it has been a tremendous success. Because have you happened to break the scores down by male and female?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Okay. Have you broken the scores down at that school in 6 through 8 according to male and female?
Yes, we have. We've
Okay.
broken them down by individual, and we can see there's no significant difference between the male and the female. The scores are low across the school. I'd also like to say, just in response to you, Dr. Adkins has supported some very simple things that I think that would help James Stevens. Some courtesy busing, because the parents are very worried about their children walking to school within the neighborhood. He brought that up in the meeting the other day. The other thing that was brought up, an earlier start time, where parents wouldn't have to leave for work and their children would be unattended till 9:30. So I just wanted, those are the discussions we're having, and I think they're good. I think there are some good examples here.
And I can tell you that the example about the start time in particular came from their SAC. So we are working directly with that particular school. But again, we don't bring all those conversations to the table, but they are occurring.
Anybody else? Thank you.
20 minutes over our time.
That's 'cause of
Okay, we now move on to, I'm sorry, Ms. Morgan, you want
the-
something else?
She's commenting
Ms.
about
Dozier?
the time, and it's because of the extra time we spent on the goals.
Now we'll go to public comment. Mr. Martin, would you please read the disclaimer for public comment?
School board policy provides the opportunity at this point in the meeting to address the board concerning any matter on this meeting's agenda. The subject of comment is limited to the items on the briefing meeting agenda. The time allowed per speaker is 3 minutes.
Is there anybody on the right side that would like to speak?
We don't have a time certain for the end, do we?
Anybody on the left side would like to speak? Seeing one. Anybody else? Okay, Ms. Quackenbush.
We did yesterday, too.
Discussion, I love to hear this workshop's working. It's ironic that we're really focused on statistical quality control and Six Sigma, and I believe in them. I used them in my company, saved a lot of money, and made our processes better. But one thing I learned is that you can't change a process you don't control. Basically, what we're doing here is we're rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic more efficiently. So I think we're wasting a lot of time on a lot of fringe elements, and we really need to address the major ones. And some of that was mentioned in your platform development. The major one is our state capital, Tallahassee, is dictating to us and giving us unfunded mandates, things that are not workable in the local area. It's causing havoc in our schools. And Mary, thank you for bringing up the complexities that arise from doing the testing and having half the kids in the class and half the kids waiting. Those things are happening every day. They're not to be minimized. I've had so many hundreds of parents tell me that this is an extreme problem, costing up to 40% of their class time for learning. If they don't have time to learn, how can we possibly expect them to get better scores? That's a major deal. Now, on your proposal to promote internet sales tax, this is a terrible burden on small businesses especially, who may have small internet businesses and may not be able to handle the complexities of all the states and the different sales taxes that are required. It's certainly a non-starter for most people, and conservatives especially, to promote an internet sales tax. What Marco Rubio had promoted a long time ago that may be a better solution we can look at, again, statewide, is that we go for a statewide sales tax rather than property tax in order to support education. Because this would give us across the board, this would allow us to get the tourism tax that we need in order to support our schools better. So perhaps we could revisit that idea that Marco Rubio was promoting long ago. Now, one thing that Jeannie brought up I really liked was the pencil and paper testing. It's obviously not working what we're doing today. And pencil and paper testing does work, doesn't crash. It gives us a fair result. We get instant results. We can look back at the questions. It makes imminent sense. There are no studies I have ever found to date, no reason, nor no budget given for doing it on computer. And if you can find me a study that says computerized testing is going to help our students to learn, I'd like to see that study because it does not exist. Paper and pencil testing has served us well for hundreds of years, and it can serve us again for more years. We can use computers as an adjunct or an assist in the classroom for productivity. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, board comments, we'll start with, I'm
Other
sorry?
side of the room.
I'm sorry?
The other side of the room.
We didn't have anybody on our side.
Okay.
So we're
Here,
good.
the other side, sorry.
Thank you. Ms. Fisher?
Well, I have a few things, but I'm going to reserve them for later due to the time, if I may.
Sure.
Thank you.
Ms. Dozier?
I have nothing at this time.
Ms. Morgan?
Okay, I'm just going to mention an Education Next poll. Public support for national tests, 67% in favor, 21% opposed, 12% neutral. Teachers, 46% opposed, 47% in favor. Opt-out, majority of teachers in the general public and even parents opposed letting parents decide whether to opt out, with others neutral or supporting it. On local control, half of respondents said state government should decide whether a school is failing. 18% said federal government, 32% said local government. Just throwing it out there. We got a letter from Mr. Bauer today letting us know that Charity Navigator, America's premier charity evaluator, who look to highlight efficient, ethical, and open charities, awarded the Foundation for Lee Public Schools a 4-star rating. It indicates that the foundation adheres to good governance and other best practices that minimize the chance of unethical activities and consistently executes its mission in a fiscally responsible way. They outperform most other charities in America. So kudos to an organization that has been an incredible partner and great asset to Lee County Public Schools, and those are my comments.
Thank you. Moving to Mr. Martin
No, thank you.
and Dr. Graham.
Quick things. One, it's the Alliance of Educational Leaders looking for a region of innovation. When Mr. Sarah couldn't remember the name of the group, that's what it's called. The only other thing I want to mention is there is an account on Facebook right now that's touting itself as the School District of Lee County Fact Check. And it is the fan page of someone who goes by the name of Ryan Truther. I just want the public and the board and anyone who's listening to know that the School District of Lee County Fact Check is not a district site, but our logo is being used on it. And so I just want to make people aware, if you read enough of it, you'll realize that it's not coming from us. We do have a Facebook page. It's called Lee County Schools, and you can access it from our website. You can access it from our app. But I just want you to be aware that the information that's on there is not coming from the school district. And we would like to find out who's behind it, so that we can have a conversation about using our logo without our permission. I just wanted everybody to be aware that that's out there.
Thank you. We now have, our next meeting will be in a half an hour, 6 o'clock, will be our regularly scheduled board meeting. Having nothing further, this meeting is adjourned.